Hello, and welcome, my gentle and of course very modern apes. Today is January the 22nd, and welcome to Skeptalk. I am your gentle and modern host today, Erika or Gutsick Gibbon here on YouTube, and I am joined with my guests for today, Grayson. Grayson, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about who you are and what we're going to be chatting about today? Hopefully creationism, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name is Grayson. I run a YouTube channel called Based Theory, as in a well-based theory, or the opposite of a cringe theory, like intelligent design, which is really more cringe than it is theory. But I basically have dedicated my channel to debating all kinds of pseudoscientific nonsense. So young Earth creationism, intelligent design, flat earthers, debated a lot of flat earthers recently, climate change denialists, all kinds. At this point, I disembarked on my YouTube channel journey about a year ago. And in that time, I've had debates on pretty much every topic you can think of. I mean, from the Big Bang to, maybe abiogenesis might be a little bit of a specialty of mine in this regard. So if you got questions about the origin of life, send those in. Evolution, debated a lot of creationists. My first my first big debate on my channel was kind of a rite of passage. There was Kent Hovind.
I can already guess. Of course,
yep.
Of course.
And I was going to say, I'm currently a little bit infamous around the YouTube sphere for having been one of the few people that took Kent Hovind up on his challenge to actually go out to Dinosaur Adventure Land. I spent the night there and debated Kent live and in person. That was a crazy, ridiculous journey. And I've done debates on more topics, even just like from the historicity of the resurrection or Exodus or Noah's flood to talking about like the origins of Yahweh and Christianity or Islam, and even a little bit of like consciousness, physicalism, and free will. I mean, there's a lot of different subjects that we could cover. So if you've got any questions, dear viewer, about any of that stuff, I definitely call into the show tonight.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm actually so glad that you brought it up, because I was going to try to like goad you into talking about it, like going to the the actual place where Kent Hovind runs his we can be generous, we can call it a ministry, but where, Dinosaur Adventure Land is a little bit of a notorious location. Anybody who follows like the debate sphere for creationism on YouTube, or just the debate sphere in general, has seen Kent. I mean, Kent is willing to talk to just about anyone. Most criminal grifters tend to be, but like you went there and saw him in person. I was all of us who would chat with you on the regular were so glad to see that you had a safe return. I was worried you weren't going to come back.
Yeah. Well, no, it was definitely, I think I can say this with confidence, the strangest 24 hours of my life. I did like compile some of the footage together, but words and footage really just cannot compare to like the experience of being there, interacting with Kent, going Walmart shopping with them. Just, it was super bizarre. And yeah, I'm glad that I made it out safe as well. We can call it, I think it's probably best to call it a compound. It is a compound. There are like 30 of his followers that live there and attend his services, where he says the same thing every single week. And like, it's just, he's super obsessed with it not being a cult. It is very important to him that it is not recognized as a cult. He made this super clear to me, even as I'm driving out and I'm leaving. He came up to my car as I'm leaving and gave me like a 6-page manifesto that was like an FAQ about why they're not a cult. And he asked me to go to the gas station because there had been some ladies at the gas station nearby that had been calling Dinosaur Adventure Land a cult. And he wanted me to go there and talk to them and explain it's definitely not a cult.
And give them he can leave whenever he wants, right, Grayson? You can go whenever you feel like it. I'm not holding you here at gunpoint. It's fine.
Yeah, it was super surreal, super out of body. So yeah, definitely glad to be back, glad to be here. I would say
I can imagine.
Yeah, I would say that my goal for tonight, right, and a big goal for my channel and a big reason for why I've been doing this. Well, one, I'm kind of an argumentative person, so to spare my friends and family from that side, I decided to channel it to more productive use, arguing with pseudoscientists on the internet, which has been a lot of fun. But also, the thing that I get out of it more so than just getting to be argumentative is I really enjoy it when somebody brings forward a new argument or like a new piece of evidence or something that I don't know about, and I get to learn something new, and I can feel like, hey, like, that was a completely wild conversation debate I just had, but now I get to go and think of things like, hey, I maybe wouldn't have thought of that question before, or I've never come across this line of evidence. So I get to go and research and learn something new that I didn't know before. Learning, big hobby of mine, love learning. And so that would be my goal for tonight. If one of you out there can stump me or can bring up something that I've never heard about and make me learn something new, I would be grateful for you, dear caller, if you can try.
Grayson, this is a great attitude to have because the past several times I've been on Skeptalk, we've had creationists call in, or just folks who have interesting perspectives in general call in and offer something new to think about. Not necessarily something convincing, but certainly something that makes you go, okay, like how else could I tackle this? How more could I educate myself on this subject? So this is a great foray for that. And for those of you out there who are thinking to yourself, like, oh my God, I would love to ask Grayson, my stumper question on abiogenesis or my, incredibly well thought out new flood model, right? But you don't necessarily want to call in because calling in can be intimidating. Awesome news. You can just super chat it. And if you super chat to me and Grayson, we have to answer it at the end. We are bound by the laws of the internet to answer these super chats. So if you want to ask a question, even about Dinosaur Adventure Land, you want to know how Grayson made his harrowing escape, you can ask that via super chat as well. And of course, I, your gentle and modern host, am always happy to answer any and all questions that you want to shoot our way. And go ahead. Oh, was that just me echoing? It might have just been me echoing. We actually already have a call on the line. So I'm thinking we'll just go ahead and get into this if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Get excited because the first one is one of my personal favorite topics, and I know that you're partial to this as well and have been keeping up with it. We have Jay Pluto, pronounced he, him, from Georgia, and he is actually, I think I might have booted you to the front, Jay. That's okay. We're gonna come to our other caller here in a second. So Jay has a bit of an issue. The school that he's attending is requiring intelligent design classes to graduate. He wants to discuss the anthropic principle from his class. So we're gonna hash out some intelligent design concepts. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, Jay, I'm trying to let you in here. Hopefully it's gonna go. Jay, can you hear us? Jay, hello. Are you there? Jay, we can't hear you. SOS.
Oh no.
Okay, I can hear you now. Yes, wonderful.
Okay.
Hit us up. What's going on?
Okay. So like the thing said that I go to a Christian school, and I've been really frustrated recently because they're requiring 4 years of Bible classes to graduate, which is frustrating because I could have taken like a half a semester class this semester, and I'd be done with it, and I'd have an entire full year of class periods free to go. But so the anthropic principle, as described in my worldview class, that's what they're calling it, is that the argument that since the Earth is the perfect environment to sustain life, then that must mean that there is some sort of intelligent designer. And during class, I brought up the like puddle analogy, where it's like a puddle like gains sentience and is like this crack in the ground that I'm in. It's the perfect shape to fit the shape of my body, so it must have been designed perfectly for me. So it's like a puddle is like water goes into the shape of the container that it is in.
Of course.
So it's more it makes more sense that the puddle like was shaped into the cracks and not the other way around. That not like the cracks were shaped for the puddle.
How was the reaction to that? How did that go over?
My teacher, because I have to pretend to be a Christian in order to like stay at that school, because I can't really go to any other school. But so I said that this is what I've heard from like my atheist friends that I talk to.
Right. Who goes to another school?
And, yeah, my atheist friends who goes to another school. But he said that I should tell my atheist friends that his counter to my puddle argument was where did the puddle or the shape of the ground come from? And since you don't know where they've come from, it had to be designed. And he said that as long as you keep asking questions to these analogies, the arguments from atheists just fall apart.
Well, this sounds a lot like the if those of you who again foray into these circles online, that sounds like the Darth Dawkins line of reasoning. How do you feel about that, Grayson? Is that ringing any bells?
Yeah, I was actually going to debate Darth Dawkins about a similar topic, and then he ended up ghosting me, and I waited for like 4 hours, and he never showed up. So you're bringing up fresh wounds for me, Erika. But yeah, this is definitely giving me flashbacks. I've had this exact argument before. I've brought up the whole puddle analogy. I think it's a great analogy. But yeah, just asking, well, what about where did water come from? Where did the hole for the puddle to form in? Like, obviously, if you're going to use an analogy, and no analogy is going to be 100%. You can't reason from analogy to then extrapolate other things that, like, there was a specific goal that you are trying to express, something you are trying to convey with that analogy. So trying to push it into other extraneous details of the analogy is not the point of using an analogy. But I guess this is overall a fine-tuning argument. Like, the anthropic principle is sometimes brought up even in mainstream science and in physics. It's not brought up in the way that you're probably learning about it in your classes there. And I feel, I'm sorry that you have to go through that. And in order to get like an education, you have to put up with like literally being taught pseudoscience. Like, that makes me feel so bad for you. I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. But my general approach with fine tuning, and the issue that I have with the fine tuning arguments, is that typically the way that it's imagined is like each one of these parameters, these constants of nature, is like a dial. And this dial needs to be tuned in to a very specific value in order for life to exist. But I just have to question that basic like framework, because there's no evidence that any of these constants are dials or can be changed in their value. Like, just because you can plug in a different number in the physics equations doesn't mean that there's any evidence that any of these can assume different values than they are. So it's like the actual evidence that things are finely tuned. It's like our sample size for the universe is 1. So the statistical odds of us having this universe based on the sample size we have is 100%. We don't have any other universes to compare to. We don't have any other values for the laws of physics or the constants of nature to compare to. So fundamentally, the entire premise of fine tuning just has never made sense to me. And it basically, for them to ask, well, what about where the puddle came from, or what about where the hole came from? That just is essentially asking, why do we have something rather than nothing? When you get right down to it, that's where those questions all just inevitably lead. In which case, like I would just say nothing by definition cannot exist. Like if something exists, it's not nothing. So to me, it's not a surprise why we have life on the only planet in that, like, why we have life on a planet in a habitable zone. Because if it's a planet outside of a habitable zone, you're not going to have life forming on there. Like, it makes total sense that when you have the conditions necessary for life, that's where you find life forming. I don't understand why the reasoning would be so switched up and turned around for the principle in question. So, Erika, what's your take on all that?
Yeah, I mean, so to add to that, like from my perspective, like I've never found the design argument or the fine tuning argument to be particularly compelling either. And part of the reason for that is because no matter what you're talking about, there are a lot of ways to skin a cat, right? There's a broad habitable zone. There's a broad habitable zone for a planet, for life. Extremophiles constantly push that boundary as we understand it. And moreover, a lot of these fine-tuning arguments, when you dig a little bit into them, they seem to like dissipate away into being arguments from incredulity, right? The fine-tuned nature of how your body maintains blood pressure or any portion of its homeostatic condition, right? Like all of this, people get blown away by it, right? Like I saw a post on Twitter just the other day that was like, it was open heart surgery and the heart is beating. And it's like, how can you look at this and believe that there's no God, right? And it's like, well, because there are a lot of aspects of the human body and of most bodies, all the way down to our genomic structure, that they don't really strike me as very well designed, right? And the incredulity that I think people often feel is coming from a place of like, well, it's because you haven't really looked into our understanding of, one, how these things actually work, and two, how they're proposed to have evolved or come about in the first place. There are stepwise conditions that have been proposed, stepwise processes that have been proposed for just about everything you can imagine that is a biological system, from the famous blood clotting cascade or the bacterial flagellum that were presented in the trial in Dover that put intelligent design to the test in the US courts, and the Bush appointed judge who was, thought to be extremely sympathetic towards intelligent design walked out of that and he was like, not only shouldn't we teach intelligent design in schools, but it is also just reskinned creationism. It is nothing more than an argument from incredulity, to the degree that the people who were presenting cases, like, Michael Behe, Dymski, the whole lot of them, most of the Discovery Institute folks, they're coming in saying, we have no idea how this, that, or the other thing evolved. And then they end up getting buried in papers and literature from 2004, even at that point, as to our current understanding. And when I say buried, I mean they're court sketches of like Michael Behe sitting there, obscured by all the books and stacks of papers that the prosecution brought up and slapped on the table, saying, you say we have no idea how the blood clotting cascade evolved. Here's books 1 through 150 as to our current thinking. The point being that if there's a question out there for like, okay, well, how does an Earth or planet like ours end up so fine-tuned? Well, go out and look, right? Like, how do planets typically form? How common is it for there to be water on a planet or liquid water on a planet, or for it to be this distance from the sun? Is a planet that's in a habitable zone really that rare, right? And my understanding is that, at least according to I believe it's the Drake equation, correct me if I'm wrong, Grayson, but like, according to what a lot of astrobiologists have done, a lot of work that they've done out there, life itself probably isn't all that rare. We don't know, right? Our sample size is 1, as Grayson put it, but that's just because we haven't gotten out there to run any tests literally anywhere else besides our moon, which isn't thought to be habitable. But the number of locations that at least seem to be able to harbor life as we understand it, combined with the fact that life appears on Earth 3.8 billion years ago in its most basic form, suggests to me that life is incredibly flexible, and that this idea for fine-tuning is probably going to get a retool down the line as we continue to find that life pushes boundaries and isn't quite so fragile. So my little rant is over, but what I would say is that, combined with what Grayson has said here, which is that oftentimes you're looking at a fine-tuning argument, which in and of itself is turtles all the way down, right? You could just as easily turn around and say, well, you're just adding an additional supposition, right? You're saying that the source for all of these things is God, whereas from your position or from Grayson's position or from my position, we might be saying we don't know what the source is, or the source is not God, it's something else that we don't yet understand. And then that's typically combined with arguments from incredulity from people who don't seem to feel bothered to look into any of this stuff in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I also want to
Awesome.
make a quick point about like basically you shouldn't be surprised that when all the necessary conditions for a thing are met, that you can expect that thing as an outcome. So to me, it's like the anthropic principle totally reasons backwards. It's like, isn't it a coincidence that we have life in the exact conditions that we would expect to give rise to life? Like it's like no, it's not a surprise. That actually is completely follows logically. But um yeah, I definitely think that the search for life outside the Earth is like kind of putting a finer point on this, because like we're seeing organic compounds be pretty abundant in the universe as a whole. Like
Yeah.
a really large percentage of all the carbon that has been seen in our universe like exists like in ice and dust clouds like outside of planets, like, and it's formed in like little organic rings of molecules that like can give rise to all sorts of like interesting space chemistry. Like things can arise like all around the universe when the conditions are right. So this is not surprising. And then just in case you ever encounter this kind of fine-tuning argument with like people bringing up like the constants of nature and physics, it's also important to keep in mind that oftentimes like what we consider to be a constant will then later will learn more fundamental physics for which the value of that constant is derived from like more fundamental things going on. Like that happened with the Fermi constant. It's happened before in the history of physics, where it's like before we knew that more underlying physics, people were saying, how strange is it that this constant has to be this fine-tuned value, or else the entire universe can't exist if it's even just like 1% bigger or smaller. And then we've learned that there are more underlying physics that explain exactly why that constant is the value that it is. So as we progress, we tend to learn more about, okay, this is not really fine-tuned. There are reasons for these values.
So, and like to add like a final cap on this, I think that I want to round this out, right? Like intelligent design as a way of thinking is not scientific, right? There is zero model underlying this concept of intelligent design. There is no criteria for detecting design. The best they can do is say, well, if it looks like something that humans do, then it's design. Okay, I can go out to Arches National Park and find natural arches. Humans build arches. Does that mean that every arch in Arches National Park had to have been created by humans? The answer is no, because we have a mechanism that we know and understand to create natural arches, right? Weathering on a heterogeneous rock. Okay, cool. You can apply that to literally anything that someone implies is design, from the gear legs that you see in some arthropods to the circulatory system as a whole to anything, right? Pick it. Someone has done like a vast amount of research and literature on that exact subject. And you can find more out about that by hopping on Google Scholar. So the answer to is intelligent design like this viable alternative way of thinking? It's simply not. It is a model-less idea adrift in basically pseudoscientific pools exclusively. And anybody who tells you otherwise, you can effectively just respond to that by saying, okay, like detail to me. What is the model of intelligent design? What predictions does it make? Right? What predictions has it made in the past? Gold standard of science, as we all know, right? They're not going to be able to.
Yeah, all of its reasoning is ad hoc, and it has no explanatory or predictive power as a model. So, not science.
Yeah.
Not science.
Also, I was flipping through my notes because I have like a notebook for all my notes that I take in class, and I saw this one thing that it says that in the Christian worldview, humans are made in God's image, and that reflects in us by meaning that we have the capacity to reason and think through problems, to have empathy, and there were a couple other things, but those are the two that stuck out to me. And I said, and I wrote down that apparently he said that only humans can claim these things, like only humans have the capacity to reason and think through problems and have empathy. So seeing that, I immediately thought of you, Erika, and that you might like to respond to that.
Man, you're just teeing me up, Jay. I've got this, like, you know, my driver is ready for this exact topic. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a single characteristic that humans have that is different categorically from other animals, right? Other animals, and I typically focus on. Sorry, I've got dogs here. Okay, hold on, Grayson, you start us off like quiet my dogs.
Yeah, so I hope this doesn't steal Erika's thunder at all, but actually one of my favorite professors in college was my genetics professor, and he had a challenge that he would issue each semester, and he would ask the entire class, "Can you come up with one trait that is unique to humans that is not present in like a smaller degree to any animals?" And every year, he'd been doing this for 30 years. Every year, everybody would try to brainstorm, like, you know, paying taxes, creating music, or blah blah blah. And every time, I mean, he was so good. This guy was like, I could tell stories about this guy all day, but he would always have like an example from the animal kingdom of that behavior displayed by animals in, like, maybe it was to a lesser degree, but the same general behavior. Like, and I mentioned I was argumentative. I do have a problem with trying to play devil's advocate too much. So I was going off in this class. I was like trying to brainstorm everything that I could think of to try to come up with something that is unique to humans. And he had a rebuttal for all of it. I mean, I brought up like the fact that we have belief in supernatural entities and religions. And even to that, he brought up that there are certain chimpanzees that have been documented as greeting an incoming thunderstorm as if it was a rival male chimp. So not anthropomorphizing, but like chimpomorphizing the thunderstorm. And this being sort of like a key behavior that leads to the development of gods, like the very early shamanism or animalistic, like animism beliefs and practices of anthropomorphizing like forces of nature or animal entities. So it was super fascinating. And I'll just tell you that in all of his years of teaching, nobody could come up with an actual example that was unique. But since then, and I've told this story a little bit more, and I would like to hear maybe Erika's take on this if she's heard this brought up, because somebody has brought up to me an example of a behavior that seems to be unique to humans. And I looked into it and I couldn't find any counterexamples in the animal kingdom. So if anybody knows about this, call in or send a super chat or something, because the unique human behavior was actually homophobia and transphobia, as being like there are no documented cases in the animal kingdoms of animals, basically either bullying or being abusive towards other members of their own species because of their sexual preferences. Or, I mean, like this. So that was a kind of like, oh man, oh, I'm not really proud to be a human, like at moment for me. So I didn't hear of any example from the animal kingdom that refutes that. So maybe that is the only unique human quality that I can think of. And like, I'm really disappointed that that is a unique human quality.
So my off the cuff argument against that would be that unfortunately homophobia and transphobia and also racism and sexism and a lot of these prejudices that we have are exacerbations of like basic level tribalism that's exhibited by a lot of social animals, like of an in-group out-group preference. So it tends to be like, oh, you're not like me, so therefore you're bad, right? So I would argue that that's different, but a degree difference rather than a kind difference, much like our ability to empathize across space and time, which was, as I've said before on this channel, Robert Sapolsky, who's a famous primatologist and does like neurology and things like that as well, which is an interesting combination. He said that it was. He's awesome. He's got two great books. Behave is the one on my shelf, but then Determined was one on free will that he recently published. That's absolutely fascinating. But yeah, okay. So like, let's think here. What do humans do that nothing else does. Okay, is it tool use? Absolutely incorrect. There are so many different organisms that use tools, from proboscideans to corvids to cetaceans, every kind of ape, every kind of monkey. And when I say every kind, I don't mean each one of them uses tools, but every general group basically has tool users in it. And they use all sorts of different types of tools. Orangutans will wrap their hands in thick, waxy leaves to break open thick, husked, spiky fruits so that they don't hurt their hands, right? Chimpanzees can sharpen sticks with their teeth to skewer bush babies in areas of like hollows of trees that they can't normally reach at, right? That they can't get to. Crows are capable of filling up little glasses of water with stones so they can get a little bug that's floating on the top to rise into the area where they can actually stick their head in and pluck it off the top, right? Animals are capable of using tools. And when I say animals, I mean non-human animals are capable of using tools. So nope, that's not it. And we can actually see the emergence of hominins using tools through the geologic record, right? Through our paleontological and archaeological record, starting with really basic, like hammer and anvil systems, all the way up through Acheulean and Oldowan, rather, and Acheulean tools and Mousterian and every industry you can imagine. So nope, not tool use. Okay, what if it's empathy? Wrong. We see other animals, and of course I'm focused on apes, right? But they exhibit empathy to degrees that are at least in the human ballpark, putting themselves at risk for non-related members of their own group. We've seen this in captivity several times. Chimps can't swim, so when a little chimpanzee falls into the moat that typically surrounds zoos, chimpanzees such as Washoe, who I can't remember where she was housed, it might have been the Yerk station, but will rush to their aid at great personal risk, right? We've seen it in monkeys, like wild macaques and things like that on the streets of India. You see like these TikTok videos go viral of like, oh, a monkey helps another monkey who's been electrocuted by a wire or whatever. They won't leave their side at great personal risk to themselves because people are coming and trying to shoo them away. We see them wage war against one another. Chimpanzees are highly political animals, right? They will form groups and patrol their territory and systematically annihilate adjacent groups. That's what we do, except on a huge scale, right? As Grayson mentioned, we have these potentials for early, potentially religious ideas where they beat the ground and freak out when thunderstorms come in a way that no other animal seems to be doing in that area, as if they are making some connection that we can't understand. Now, granted, we don't really know why they're doing that. And there are a ton of anecdotal stories just like that of chimpanzees or bonobos exhibiting really strange behavior that we can't put two and two together for and suss out why they're doing it. Well, does there have to be like a practical reason? We do things without practical reasons all the time. I had a friend who did research in the DRC on bonobos at one of the field sites out there and saw exactly this. And I don't know if she's publishing on it, so I'm not going to like bring it up, but like, you know, them doing these very odd behaviors in relation to death and to especially infants and juveniles dying that they don't seem to do to any other members of their dead. That's absolutely bizarre, right? We could go through absolutely every concept of what humans do and other animals are doing it. Language, another great example. Human toddlers share over 90% of their gestural repertoire innately with chimpanzees and bonobos. Campbell's monkeys have syntax and grammar that they use in their calls. Even geladas utilize, they're like one of the dumber cercopithecoid monkeys. They utilize Zipf's and Menzerath's law in communication. Right? So none of these characteristics that we've previously assigned as exclusive to humanity are in fact exclusive to humanity. We've just taken some aspects and dialed them up to 11, and others we've let fall by the wayside, right? So we really beef up our brains. We're physically not superimposing outside of endurance running or throwing, right? So it's, you know, you're min-maxing your character here. The point being, what is there? What is there that's unique? What is there that's wholly and categorically unique? A soul? I guess you could say that, but that's not something that you can test or even show support tangibly exists. So it becomes completely unfalsifiable. Everything that is empirically examinable about humans as compared to other animals exists on a gradient, which is exactly what you would expect if we descend from a common ancestor with all of the other members of the tree of life. So, okay, that's my rant. Sorry.
Okay, well,
Did I put you to sleep? Did I put you to sleep over there with that? Sorry. I get a little excited about that particular topic.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I was listening very intently, Somebody in chat expressed a worry that I dropped the call. No, I just muted my phone so that I could take a sip of lemonade without bothering everybody with the sound.
Oh, so polite.
But I think that I've taken up quite a bit of your time, and there's probably other callers who you need to move on to. So.
Well, thank you so much for calling, and we wish you the best of luck in dealing with the intelligent design stuff. It sounds like you got a really good head on your shoulders, and you're more than equipped to handle kind of what they're throwing at you. You seem very thoughtful, and sounds to me like you're going to do just fine. Just get the grade and get out of there. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Oh man, that sucks. That's brutal. Having to get those, because I remember that. I know I've told you this, Grayson, and others probably know this as well, but like I had to take Bible in middle school as well. And we had exactly what he was talking about, right? Like a worldview class. And it was basically just like, here's the good worldview, and it's the one that we teach at our school. And then every other worldview is awful and bad. And it was like they listed all the isms that they dislike, and that was the bad call.
I'm probably in the opposite camp in that my interactions with religion were extremely minimal throughout most of my childhood up till like maybe 5th grade is when I realized that, okay, no, people take these beliefs very seriously. I always had thought it was like a Santa Claus kind of situation. Like I figured out, hey, reindeer can't fly in like 1st grade, and like figured out there wasn't a Santa Claus. So I kind of figured it was like that for God too. And it wasn't until 5th grade when I realized, hey, wait, no, I think the adults are taking this like really seriously. Like I got in trouble for fighting with the kid because he accused me of being an atheist, and I didn't know what that is. And so then the teacher talked to me after class, and it was talking about this, and I was like, wait a minute, like this lady really believes this stuff. And like that was when I realized, like, hey, like this is a real thing. So I definitely am from like the opposite, where like I didn't really grow up with a lot of religion, and I consider myself like extremely lucky to have like a whole childhood without any of that kind of baggage attached to it.
Yeah, no, that's nice. I wonder what that would have been like. I mean, I don't dislike. Well, I dislike that aspect of my upbringing, I guess. I was going to say I don't dislike it. It offered me a nice, alternative perspective to kind of come from. But like looking back, it does rub me the wrong way that like I know they're still doing that, right? And a lot of the people who aren't interested in this kind of stuff, who aren't like Jay Pluto, are going to get out of that, and they're going to be like, oh well, I learned all of that when I was in middle school, elementary school, high school, right? Like I don't need to really give it any more thought. It seems like to me that everyone else has already figured it out for me. Evolution bad, intelligent design good, or young Earth creationism good, or what have you. And that seems to be the end of the road for a lot of people, and they don't even have a shot. Like I know I've also said this before on the show, right? But it's like how many impeccable scientists and thinkers are we missing out on because they're told that there's only one way to interpret the Bible, if we're talking about Christianity here in the West, right? That sucks so much, and it bums me out to an infinite degree. So in a way it's kind of good, Grayson, that you're like as a child are like pushing back and like forcing to think a little bit more about it. A healthy discussion is always good, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Okay, next up. Okay, we have two theist callers, which is unusual. So hopefully both of them will stay on the line here. We're going to go in order. So DeAndre, him is first. He's from LA. He's a theist, and his question here, or his topic, is he wants to know if religion is an evolutionary necessity. And then after that, Grayson, we have an abiogenesis caller. So hopefully Martin will stay on the line, and we'll get to that as well. All right. Okay, DeAndre, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful! Welcome to Skeptalk. And for those of you out there, if you have additional questions and you don't want to call in, don't forget to super chat because we're going through all of them at the end, even little super chats. So keep that in mind. DeAndre, tell us a little bit about your question and about your topic here.
Okay. But it's pretty much I've been calling on the line a few times, talking through talking through some of the things, some of my faith, and I just been going through just seeing things. And after talking to Jimmy, Matt, and even Forrest, I come to realize a bit that I really don't have any real evidence yet, except that people in the past have worshipped before, and it seems like it's a prerequisite to us becoming humans, the humans we are today. Because, like you said earlier in the last call, even chimpanzees are starting to assign like natural things with like not really religious sense, but like sort of like personalizing it a bit.
Doing weird stuff, yeah.
So
the question then is basically what you asked, right? So like, is religion an evolutionary prerequisite rather to reach sort of the level where humans are today, our level of sociality and technology and, you know, civilization, as it were? Would that be an okay characterization?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I would say that it isn't religion per se. That my perspective would be that it isn't religion necessarily as so much as it is, the some kind of cultural or community wide belief system, shared belief system that binds the group together. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the past, many times, especially, you know, the past 500 years, I would say, as society has like moved up and up and up, is that the ideas that bind don't necessarily have to be good, right? They don't have to be spiritual, they don't have to be religious, and they don't have to be good. It can be as simple as a shared xenophobia towards an othered group. And humans have long been characterized by our ability to do absolutely selfless, compassionate, incredible things for people who we consider our in group, and some of the most vile acts imaginable to those that we consider our out group. So I think that what religion is kind of the role that religion is playing oftentimes in people groups, especially early on, is it's this shared ideology that says, okay, we're this group and we all believe this thing, right? That group over there, they don't believe the same thing as we do. And so what we're going to do is wipe them out, right? And then that, you know, puts your group on top or whatever, gives you some kind of advantage because you take their stuff or their people or whatever. So I don't think that it's that's a necessity, of course, at all. I think humans, when we're doing our cool, peaceful thing, we're a lot better of a species. And in the same way, like religion doesn't have to be violent like that. But I think that unfortunately, that is the role that it can play as this societal glue and reason for banding together as a unit, like sort of defining the group by that religion. Does that make sense? I'm sort of stumbling over my words.
No, I understand. Religion does bring groups together, but also does create like an in-group and an out-group a bit. But isn't that more like, since it does that, wouldn't that be like, isn't that by extension beneficial to at least early humans, since so many different societies would probably be affected by different diseases, and associated with them could cause like a cascaded and effect of disease spreading?
Well, I think it certainly performed the role of facilitating a lot of conflict and mediation between people groups early on. But at the same time, I don't think that religion necessarily has to be that triggering factor, right? Like, for instance, there were a lot of extremely successful hominin groups, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Homo naledi, Homo heidelbergensis, if you want to say that that's a thing, the East Asian Archaic group, Floresiensis, things like that, who were, for all intents and purposes, just as, if not more successful than modern humans, if we're defining success by how long a species lives. And we have no idea if they had or did religion or not. We just don't know. Similarly, there have been human societies that define themselves not so much by their religious beliefs, but by their shared values in law or culture or what have you, right? You can find other things, and indeed hominids and humans in general in the past have found similarities to bind them together that aren't necessarily religion. But I also think we're a really curious species, and so especially early on, when we see something that we can't explain, right, we tend to say, oh my God, I will not be satisfied until I have some kind of explanation for it, right? And so for some people groups, it became, what creates lightning? Zeus makes lightning, right? Because I'm a person, and if I lived up in the clouds and was storming, and maybe I would make lightning. So they anthropomorphize aspects of nature, and that's how you get a lot of different, like especially very early, almost like animistic religions. So, sorry, Grayson, please jump in.
Yeah, I was going to approach it kind of from a similar approach with both psychology and then maybe a little bit about human history. So psychologically, I think that most people are more comfortable with answers than they are with open questions. And I think that you can kind of see that across most different cultures, that there is this comfort that we can derive from thinking that we have an answer rather than just having to sit with a mystery. That's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. So, if humans are generally speaking like that, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on around us that we, don't have an obvious answer for, it makes sense that over generations, people are going to start developing and inheriting answers for these things. That being said, not all successful human cultural groups have religions or beliefs in deities. Like there are lots of like hunter-gatherer tribes documented that don't have any sort of concept of a god or deities. There's like animism beliefs, but there's also just sort of, viewing nature as sacred, but not anthropomorphizing it in a way where it's some sort of mind or god. Um, but when you are talking about the much larger civilizations, right? You go from having kin groups, small tribes of hunter gatherers, to needing to organize a large group of people to do tasks, whether warfare or building monuments, whatever. And then we do see a pattern in early human civilizations, from like the Sumerians to the Egyptians to the Chinese, like the development of state civilizations usually goes hand in hand with religions, and using some sort of idea of a god or gods in order to both socially cohere large groups of people together towards common visions or common goals, and saying like in Sumeria, like literally the development of governments and taxes and states, like it was directly to the god or goddess at the temple. Like that's where all your taxes are going to. That's who's making all the governmental decisions. You believe that that god is in that temple, and who else knows what to do with your taxes better than goddess Inanna in the temple in Uruk? Like, this is like, we do see this like in Chinese civilization. It was the person who has this like the most legendary lineage of ancestors is the one who is going to maintain the harmony of the universe and be the one-on-one representative of humanity to the gods, like, and these like great divine beings. Like we do see this cropping up in civilizations, but we also see this going beyond just religions. You can have these kind of unifying social identities that can cohere large groups of people together that are not religious in nature and can be secular. Like, I mean, the entire idea of a nation state is one, but we see this precede nation states too. Like, we see like empires in history that are multi-religious or that don't have some sort of unifying religious vision, and yet they still are able to have a socially coherent civilization because of other unifying ideas and like stories that we tell ourselves. Your identity is multifaceted. It's not just I'm a Christian or I'm a Buddhist. It can also be like, if you're back in China during like the Tang Dynasty, like you are a part of that. You are like, you have a feudal system kind of where you are part of a broader system that doesn't have anything to do with your religion. You could be Buddhist. You could be some sort of local Chinese, like local religions. It didn't really matter. And society was quite coherent around other secular ideas. So I wouldn't say that necessarily that religion is necessary in the development, either evolutionarily or civilizationally, for the human species. It's more of a byproduct of our curiosity, our desire to have answers for the things happening around us. And like the need for some sort of social unifier to cohere the actions of large groups of people?
I think ultimately, just to kind of build on Grayson's last statement there, right? Like ultimately what causes people, humans specifically, to group together and form these like sedentary groups, these sedentary societies. Because when you really see religion start to explode is with like the abandoning of hunter-gatherers and nomadic people groups and starting with like sedentary agriculture, the city, right? The birth of the city and the birth of the home. And, traditionally it's like, okay, with the temple comes the city was one of the old adages, right? And people tend to point to Göbekli Tepe as one of those first places because it's kind of like a transitional period of like a firm location that people would live at seasonally, but then they would also do their nomadic stuff, a transitional form of living, if you will. But it's like, what causes people to group together? Similarities, right? In our group, we do things this way. Here are our laws. Here's what kind of clothes we wear. Here's the kind of things that we eat. Here's the kind of things that we farm. And here's what we believe. So religion is a facet of what binds people together. And historically, because of human curiosity and because of our status on understanding the world around us, I think it probably played a larger role than perhaps it does today. And if you look through history, the things that have caused people to band together and go against someone else have increasingly been less about religion and more about other things. So to kind of wrap it up with a little bow, is religion a prerequisite? No, but it can act as one, if that makes sense. It can act as a part of the many things that bind humans together and allow them to advance and trade ideas and band together and so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it pretty much just sounds like you guys are saying that religion is just one of many things that can essentially group people together and bring them more together as a group or as a country specifically. Am I right?
Yeah, I think like as a country, as a people group, as a city state, right? However you want to put it, as big or as small, it is one of the many things that can allow people to group and sort of rally around.
So religion isn't it's just one of them prerequisites then. Would you say it's probably the best at that specific goal then?
Is it the best? I think what typically tends to come first is like a shared way of doing things, general shared behaviors, right? Chimpanzees and bonobos live in groups. Hell, elephants and cetaceans live in groups. And they accomplish things and they trade cultures, at least in the sense of a lot of the apes. They don't have religion, right? So what I would say is that the reason that these guys group together is one, because they share kin lineages, right? They have kin groups that work and exist through time. That's what's caused them to kind of stay together and clump. But also they do have their cultural differences, right? If you're in troop A, they might, break open nuts using this kind of hammer and anvil system. And if you live in group B, they might do it this way, right? These are little adages, little quirks of these groups. And if immigrants come into these groups from other like troops or have emigrated like exogamously outside of their group, they will adopt those behaviors. So I think what tends to be like the oldest prerequisite is shared behaviors and shared family, right? Kin groups. But then religion can act as an additional thing, especially as you move up through trying to figure out the world around you. As Grayson said, right, it is a great answer to a lot of questions if you want to use it that way.
Yeah, and in terms of, I would not describe religion as a prerequisite towards anything, but in terms of is it the best social unifier, it really depends on what social groups you're trying to unify. Like if, for example, you're concerned about the overall flourishing of humanity as a whole and the human species, then no, I would not say that religion is the best social unifier for that, because that would involve making the entire humanity one religion, which lots of people have tried. No one's been successful. So, like, it seems like in the history of religions as social unifiers, what we've actually seen has been the opposite, right? Oftentimes, like elites will adopt a religion in the hope that it can unify their people. Like we saw that with Constantine adopting Christianity. And what happened? A bunch of schisms and splintering and religious sects popping up. I mean, through the history of religion, it always ends up splintering into different groups. That happened with Islam. that happened with Buddhism, that happened with like almost every religion that we see ends up fracturing into smaller groups instead of maintaining a larger and larger social cohesiveness across societies. So I
can
would not.
I add one thing there quick, Grayson, because I want to build on that, just like one quick thing. When that happens, society doesn't necessarily fall apart, right? In Egypt, as you mentioned earlier, there were schisms on the regular where like generally Egypt was considered polytheistic, but you might have Bast as your city's, primary head of the pantheon, or you might have Osiris, or you might have Horus, or whoever, right? It didn't mean that Egypt wasn't unified. They unified around other things. So like you can have the schisms like Grayson mentioned. It's not going to kill the society. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my point was that as its function as a unifier, it no longer functions that way if like you're Roman Catholic and you're supposed to be in the same society as a bunch of Eastern Orthodox followers. Suddenly you have a reason to beef. Like, and the religion is what's directly splitting those two groups that otherwise might have lots of other economic or political reasons to be cohesive. The religion can actually like splinter them apart. I mean, that it's not a surefire thing. Like Erika was saying, we have seen like religious schisms that didn't cause social disunity, but we have seen them absolutely cause that as well. Like especially like the Sunni Shia split in Islam, still very contentious to this day. People are still killing over it. So like these groups that otherwise could be unified together are at each other's throat because of religious differences. So if your goal, right, is to see the flourishing of humanity as a whole, I do not think that religion is a good way, a good vehicle to accomplish that.
Well, and the fact that, as Grayson pointed out, it can be such a fluid system, like depending on the religion, depending on the society, depending even on like geopolitical tensions between adjacent nations and whatever nation we're talking about, right? Sometimes it can bind, sometimes it can schism. I think that like pretty well illustrates the fact that this isn't the central tentpole that's holding people together. It can be one, certainly it can be one, and has been for a lot of people groups. But it's also been destructive. It's like a lot of tools that we as humans use. It can be wielded in a lot of different directions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But to go back to just like the last point, you said you said that religion is not not the way to bring like people together now, or like to make the ultimate benefit of society. But like, why would like I understand there's problems with this, such as schisming, such as other religions warring against each other, and just even having in their doctrine that they have specific enemies. But couldn't the religion be? Isn't there a religion out there that doesn't know? I know Buddhism and other Eastern religions don't do that as often like Western religions.
It depends on the group, unfortunately. There are groups of folks who are Buddhist or Hindu, for that matter, in the Eastern religions that in the West we tend to characterize as like, oh, those are the chill ones, right? And like they can be. Christians can be chill too, Muslims can be chill too, but unfortunately, Buddhism doesn't fix being human, and so as a result, there have been genocides and things of that nature committed by Buddhist groups as well. I'm not an expert in the topic, but in looking into a lot of this stuff, you'll see them pop up. It sucks. I wish there was one that was like blameless, but we're human, and we tend to we make a lot of things better by being here, and we also make a lot of things worse sometimes.
If you were to ask me what I would consider to be the best social cohesive factor for humans as a whole, like all people, I would just tell you empathy. Like if you have empathy for other people, regardless of their beliefs, then you're probably not going to start wars or be genocidal or take away people's rights or things like that. I would just stress that empathy can be the most powerful social cohesive agent for our species as a whole. more so than any one individual religion can.
If you could find a way to unify Earth, like in an Independence Day type scenario, against like an extraterrestrial threat or like AI or something like that, I think we would see very quickly how we as a species can change what our in group is, and band together around a shared enemy, whatever that may be. I mean, we've seen plenty of times disparate groups that have banded together despite their differences against a greater evil, but unfortunately, we're, like I said earlier, right? Like, we are incredibly empathetic. We have a capacity for empathy that really stretches to the extreme, right? Like, humans regularly pick up members of organisms that aren't even in our own species, right? And just take them into our house. And we're like, I'm going to nurse this, wounded coyote back to health. And we just do that. I mean, it's one of the things that makes humans awesome, is that we have this capacity for kindness. But without a factor like that unifies us all together, I think it's going to be really hard to see the tribalism completely disappear. And I think that religion, unfortunately, can act to exacerbate it sometimes.
That is true. That is, but I ultimately thank you for this. This helped me a lot. But ultimately, tribalism, I feel, is just a human thing. It's just been a part of us, part of our evolutionary cycle for, since I think almost the beginning. Correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's inherent to social animals, right? Because when you evolve social groups, you have both within group competition and then between group competition. So like my troop versus your troop, or our troop versus some third troop, right? Because there's a limited amount of resources, right? So competition is always going to be underlying. We're hardwired that way to some degree. But we also are hardwired to have all this other cool stuff like curiosity and empathy and compassion. And, that's awesome. We just need to find a way to have those characteristics overpower some of our other ones. And anything that can facilitate that is going to be a good thing. Cool. DeAndre, thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it. That was a fun conversation, and interesting one that I've not considered, because I know like people have talked about that before. That is a question that is super valid. I've heard like anthropologists discuss it. Like, is religion sort of this prerequisite to things like civilization? Like I said that line earlier, like first comes the temple, then comes the city. So like, you're not like, you pulled that from perfectly reasonable lines of thinking. So thank you very much for calling in and giving us a stimulating chat.
Thank you for just helping me out and giving me some more information I needed.
Of course. Best of luck, DeAndre, on your journey.
All right. Take
care, man. Man, that's a tough one, right? Because like I feel like religion, like from my perspective, right, and I feel like we're on the same page here. Like, religion isn't this separate thing from all of the other characteristics of human civilization, like whatever, capitalism, or systems of commerce or government or whatever. It's like there are ways to make them good and there are ways to make them bad. I guess I shouldn't have lumped capitalism in there. That one tends to be bad a lot of the time. But I was thinking about society things. That's a tough sell. But when you get the right or wrong person behind a system, there's always the potential that it's going to be weaponized against other people, which sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, ideologies are pretty much a part of every culture known, whether or not they're religious or secular or superstitious in nature, whatever. And yeah, I agree. Like, you can have a good absolute monarch that can do good for the people, but overall, that type of system is probably not going to lead to the best outcomes. So definitely there's sort of a min-maxing and an optimization that can be done with religion as well, probably, because some of the ideologies floating around in today's religions, especially with like some fundamentalist Christians or Muslims, about human rights and other people. not the best for humans as a whole, not the best for society, and there's definitely yeah, I mean, just having grown up in the South, there's a
Oh, I
lot of yeah,
I
there's a lot of that goes into the society that I think we would definitely benefit from going without. So
I think
I
like the
personally,
best. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I personally really dream of a future, hope for a future, whatever, where um, I'm not saying like where religion doesn't exist, but just where people are much more tolerant of others' religions, and also they're like, I definitely would want a future where things like young earth creationism doesn't exist. Like the stuff that just goes against what we've discovered as a species is just totally counterproductive. Stuff that goes against ideas of human rights or the flourishing of our species as a whole, like ideas about like apocalypses, like coming about and needing to facilitate some sort of apocalyptic future. That's like super bad and scary for
Yeah,
like
not good.
humans as a whole.
Not good. Yeah,
Yeah, so there's
the
definitely
doomsday ideology,
options.
I'm happy to wave that on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think honestly, hot take here, right? I think education is going to be the best way to move forward with all of this, right? Like an educated population is always going to be like sitting in a better position than a non-educated population, which, the internet is such a great tool in so many ways for allowing people who might not otherwise have access to information to like learn about all this cool stuff, and not just like from the science side, but from like the socio-political side as well. It's like, hey, look what happens when you do a dictatorship. Look what happens when you do a fascism, right? Look what happens when you do a genocide. All of this is really bad, and knowing about it helps us not do it again, right? So let's all be aware of how our actions impact others.
I definitely used to agree with that, but from like the more recent years and just seeing like the internet has started to produce these echo chambers of like
That's true
misinformation
too.
hives. And like the internet has facilitated that so much more. Like the whole flat earth movement could not have been a thing without the internet. Because now it's like the dumbest guy in your hometown is getting with all the other dumb guys in everybody else's hometowns. And they found a community for themselves on the internet where they think that they've disproven Einstein, and that
And they
like
can't all be
they've
wrong, Grayson. They can't
yeah,
all be wrong.
figured
Surely
out
not all of them have got it wrong.
yeah, and like they like it groups these people together in a way that like they start circulating their own version of the truth, and then they wall
Yeah.
themselves out to any other like information out there because they have a community that they feel a part of, and so they feel like it's like they're part of their identity. So they together they form this barricade against actual information, and with the rise of like how I mean, just seeing in the last year how much better AI has been getting at faking pictures and
Oh yeah.
videos really worries me about what people are seeing online and what they're passing around in their little internet enclaves. And I don't know what the internet is going to be doing in the next, 10 to 20 years to our overall society. Like,
In a
scary.
perfect world, the internet would function like a universal library for everybody to have access to important textbooks, the literature, and every PBS special that has ever aired, right? In actuality, that would never happen. And also, right, like people would be really pissed off because people like making their little in groups and out groups. You're right. Like, the internet has facilitated this, gonzo level in group, out group, isolated, atomized communities that otherwise would have been laughed out of existence. I mean, like, flat Earth was allowed by the internet. That is absolutely true. I guess I mean, like, it's, we've got the world's greatest, tool at our fingertips, in that the whole of human intelligence and knowledge is held there, accessible at the click of a button, in the palm of your hand. And like we're using it, we're using it in such a poor way. It bums me out. I get so sad about it. But okay, so I know you've been waiting with bated breath for this. We have a caller who wants to talk about abiogenesis. How would you feel about that? Positively? All right.
Yeah,
okay.
It's one of my favorite subjects.
Perfect, because like abio is not even in my ballpark. So I'm glad you've got this one. You're gonna be taking lead. So Martin, he came from Georgia. He's a theist, and what he's asking, or what he's saying rather, is abiogenesis a more likely explanation than intelligent design? So I can speak to the intelligent design stuff, not so much the abio. So Martin, welcome to Skeptalk. Thank you so much for being here. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your question?
Yeah, I guess
Wonderful.
pretty much exactly what you just described. But so I just don't find it convincing that abiogenesis is, a better explanation than.
Hey Martin, we can
What
just
I
barely hear you. Could you maybe if you're on speakerphone, maybe get off speakerphone, or maybe use headphones or something like that, because we can just barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this
That's
better?
much better already. Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that I find abiogenesis, at least the little I've learned from it, not to be as convincing as a intelligent design or being the cause of life.
So basically what you're saying is you feel that intelligent design has maybe a leg up on abiogenesis as the explanation for the origin of life. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, I would say that almost to me it seems like both require faith to, I guess, like kind of understand. And I would say that I would have just give you background. I kind of work from the point of like almost a value principle. Like I think there's value in trying to understand the world, and I think we have to at least consider ourselves to be certain to a certain degree about basic level things if we want to just function as human beings. So that's kind of how I approach the topic. Yeah.
Okay, Roger that. Grayson, kick us off, dude.
I would just like to ask maybe if you have a reason why you find intelligent design more compelling than abiogenesis, because first I want to ask what we can agree on, right? We can agree that at one point there was no life and now there is life, right? So if we can agree on that much, then we agree that somehow, some way, life had to have come about from non-life, right? Like whether or not that was intelligently designed or came about from some natural processes, we agree on all that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So generally, I don't know if you are a theistic, if you accept the theory of evolution or not, but when we look in the fossil record, right, at the very earliest strata, we see evidence for single cellular life, or clumps or colonies of cyanobacteria, single cells, like long before we see any multicellular life. So that would seem to imply at least that in the earliest days, it was just single cells. So if we can take those facts, right, then we have evidence that there was no life, only non-living things. And then there were single cells that then evolved into the rest of the life that we see today. So if we have that, then we can start coming up with naturalistic hypotheses for what kind of processes might have caused that to happen. And just when we look at the overall history of science and the amount of times where there has been something like a huge open question, a huge problem that nobody had the answer to, whenever we've come up with naturalistic hypotheses versus whenever we've had supernatural explanations for it, every time where we have resolved that, it has resolved in the favor of the naturalistic scientific hypotheses. So there's a long track record of this process. Erika brought up lightning earlier and how that used to be attributed to Zeus. But then we came up with naturalistic hypotheses, we tested them, and we found a naturalistic mechanism that generates lightning. So throughout the arc of human history, there's been a ton of examples of things that used to be explained by like a supernatural miracle or a deity causing it, that then we learned that there was a naturalistic mechanism that was truly generating this phenomenon. So I would say, like, when you examine the overall track record of science and naturalism in explaining the world around us versus the overall track record of like supernaturalistic explanations for things, it would just seem more likely to me that there's a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life. So I would just ask, what's your rationale, or what are your reasons in your thinking that intelligent design would be more probable than a naturalistic mechanism?
I would say, I guess along kind of the lines that you just described. I think if we are to, I guess, simply just take our current understanding of everything that we see and say, I have no clue, or don't want to pretty much establish a solid reasoning behind what we find, I would say that that's probably an ineffective way to approach our understanding of the world. And I would say on the lines of abiogenesis, I think it kind of like tries to give you a process of how genetic material came about, or just single cells formed, and that I feel like, based off my current understanding, that is almost like a miraculous event in its own way. So an explanation of certain assembly of atoms giving rise to what we currently find, to me, is a less efficient answer than saying, something possibly designed that thing. And I think it also, from my understanding, comes from me having, kind of this idea that the universe itself, like just along the lines of life, was not something that we can just say has a naturalistic explanation for, because I think it's almost impossible to give ourselves, I think it will be impossible to have a naturalistic understanding of how the universe, came to be.
So, Martin, let me ask you a question. If we were to create life in a lab tomorrow, right? Or maybe not even in a lab, right? Maybe we find a sterile pond somewhere and pour a bunch of chemicals into it and observe it, for 30 days, and eventually, boom, we get a very basic cell, right? Like a protocell, even. Would that process still seem miraculous to you?
No, I would say if that were to come about and we were able to find whatever that life form to be, I would think it likely wouldn't be the same kind of life that we have today, which we say, all came from one ancestor, and that ancestor apparently had, DNA replication capacity. And
do you accept common descent, or are you more of a creationist or a progressive creationist?
Yeah, I would say more on the creationist side. I don't know what progressive creationist means.
Like God creates in a series, right? So like maybe there's a creation, maybe you're like typically young Earth creationists, there's like a single creation event, but if you're an old Earth creationist, usually they'll propose like after large mass extinction events, God kind of does like a little shimmy and a shake and does some more creation. And then in that aspect, in that light, the 6 days are like day age theory-ish, and so there are multiple sort of creation bonanzas, right? So God is progressively creating his way up to the modern biodiversity, and thus evolution is not really a thing, although there are groups of related organisms. That would be like what I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel that some organisms are related to one another?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I would say that I think there's sufficient enough evidence that humans evolved from ape-like ancestor as well.
Right. Right, like moving back towards maybe like would you maybe characterize yourself like the Discovery Institute, like at the Cambrian explosion, like God does all the phyla of life, maybe?
I guess I'd have to deeper into what I know. But I would just tell you the only understanding I have of the Cambrian explosion is that we, have great emergence of diverse life in a short,
Right.
relatively short period of time. I can't give you any more information than that, so I couldn't say for sure.
So the reason why I'm asking, right, is because typically when I talk to creationists who are like, or folks who are sympathetic even towards creationism, or rather, like maybe lightly, not all in on abiogenesis as an idea. Typically, where they're coming from is like, okay, we haven't shown that life can emerge in a lab, right? That's true, right? We don't have abiogenesis solved. It's like a lot of things in science. What I will say is that my understanding of abiogenesis, and most of this comes from Nick Lane's The Vital Question, is that we have pretty robust models for each of the pieces that are necessary for abiogenesis, whether you're coming at a perspective of like RNA world or metabolism first or what have you. My knowledge of that is not very deep. But what I will say is that it would strike me as extremely odd if abiogenesis wouldn't be sort of our starting point for all life on Earth, given the fact that we can trace the genetics of every living organism into this rather large nested hierarchy down to the protein level, right? That nests successively back into the most basic organisms that we have on Earth, right? And into, every species, into every genus, into every family, and so on and so forth, into the domains of life. And that you could sort of track the emergence of given very basal genes using the molecular clock, and it does seem to match what we see in the fossil record moving back towards that 3.8 billion year old emergence of life, down to the fact that, like, this is the one that I like, the example that I like, is that in our cells, right, our eukaryotes, or the eukaryotic portions of our cell, and correct me if I'm wrong, Grayson, because I might be mixing up which one is archaea and which one is bacteria, but our cell itself has a bacterial ancestry, and our mitochondria has an archaean ancestry, right? Which is where the endosymbiosis theory comes from. That does not make sense to me. Neither of those two things make sense. The evidence for endosymbiosis of two ancestral domains of life leading to modern eukaryotes, nor does the successive nature of the nested hierarchies of all living life, unless we all descend from a common ancestral population of single cellular organisms roughly 3.8 billion years ago. Now, if you want to say, okay, fine, like I'm down with all of that, but like I believe that some intelligent agent like sparked the life that created that first organism, I would say to that it's completely unfalsifiable, right? Like it's fine if you want to say that, and I guess I can't say that it isn't true, but what I would point to is the fact that we have all of these robust ideas for how life might have started, and the second that one of those starts to hold even more water than it already does, and make no mistake, they're already fulfilling predictions made previously by biochemists moving through time and all the way back to Miller and Urey, right? The second that we can create life in a lab, the idea that there must be an intelligent agent sparking everything becomes untenable. I would say, based off of the current status of the field, it's relatively untenable, but it's sort of a God of the gaps argument at present, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and say it's impossible. I would never say that. I can't prove that. You know what I mean? So I would say the best support for abiogenesis coming from the angle of like my specialty in my field is the nature of the nested hierarchies, and is the support for endosymbiosis in the deep past. At least pointing to the common ancestor of all current life on Earth. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it makes sense, and I would say, like, from my point of view, like everything you say, I agree with. I think it's completely reasonable. And I understand that like all eukaryotes are evolved from a endosymbiotic relationship between bacteria and archaea. But then I think the one thing that I think will have difficulty establishing, and I think would be almost like a faith-based assumption to have, is to say that the metabolic end of life is arising on its own without genetic material, and then vice versa, that we can derive genetics without a understanding of or metabolism can give rise to genetics.
So my
genetics vice versa gives rise to.
My understanding of the metabolism stuff is that and the genetic code, right? The origin of both is that it boils down to information theory, which is kind of above my head. But stated clearly, John Perry of Stated Clearly has a really cool series on his channel where he goes into how we can today in simulations in computers, right? Start with the equivalent of just chemistry, and given enough time and enough samples, and that second part is crucial and I feel rarely appreciated by folks who are kind of doubting abiogenesis as a even tenable idea, right? You can form these processes that are basically super primitive metabolisms in simulation, right? Which I think that points to a proof of concept, certainly. Sorry, Grayson, I know you wanted to go here.
Yeah,
I saw you reach it.
There's a lot that I want to weigh in on here. First of all,
yeah, please.
Something a little bit off topic, but on topic. Talking about the whole God of the Gaps thing, right? When Lemaitre first was starting to talk about the whole idea of the Big Bang, he was actually he was having a famous conversation with the Pope, where the Pope asked him, this is great. You're like a Catholic priest. You're seeing evidence for the creation of the universe. And this is so great. This is a validation of Genesis and the Bible. And Lemaitre stopped him and was like, no, don't do that, because this is science. Science is provisional. It's subject to change with new data. And if you try to claim that this is evidence for God, and then tomorrow new evidence comes out and changes our idea, then suddenly it looks like you've debunked God. So he begged the Pope, do not try to put God into these gaps, because if we find out more about the actual naturalistic mechanisms involved in them, then suddenly it looks like a defeater for God. And so he cautioned, please do not, when you're talking about science and natural mechanisms, don't try to attribute God or miracles to them, because when we find out how they really work, then it's going to make people question their faiths. So that's what Lemaitre told the Pope. But in regards specifically to abiogenesis, and I want to ask you a little bit more in on this, because, and I'm not trying to be insulting here, but it sounds like you're more so relying on your personal incredulity here, where you're saying, I can accept evolution as the origin of species, but when we're talking about the origin of life and DNA and cells, you're saying that it's hard for you to comprehend how that could happen without a supernatural miracle. And I just want to hammer in on why you think that, because I certainly don't think that, and I don't really see any evidence or reasons that would lead me to think that. Why is a naturalistic mechanism not sufficient for process? What reasons would I have to say it can't be a naturalistic process? It must be supernatural or a miracle or designed by intelligence. What are your reasons to come to that conclusion?
I think that in itself is almost just a big question on just a fundamental reason why I am personally Muslim, for example. I think it comes down to, I think there has to be value in the world as we know it. In this universe, there has to be value, and maybe that is an untrue statement. But I think if there was no value in the universe as we know it, that means I think based off like a value principle, then nothing would exist if it had no value, right? So just given the fact that we are here, that means there's like value in what we see. And I think from that standpoint, I would say that in order to navigate, this world we live in that has value as we can understand it, I think it's important to try to understand what we can see. And I think what we can see is, what's in front of us. And the best explanation, I find, for some of the questions that we may have potential naturalistic explanations for in the future, to me, also have, I think what I would argue are completely reasonable explanations to be due to God.
So I think just to reiterate something I said earlier, right? I would argue that the hypotheses and models that we have right now for abiogenesis stand firm enough to be a better explanation, than a supernatural intervention, right? Have we seen them in action yet? Creating life in a lab, right, or in a puddle at Yellowstone, or whatever Dr. Deemer's up to. I don't think so, not to my understanding. Again, I'm not a biochemist, right? I don't focus on this. But still, right? These models have stood the test of time. They do make viable predictions in and of themselves, right? I don't know why. I guess I don't understand the insistence that we have, if we were completely clueless, it would be I guess another story, right? I mean, we would at least be standing on firmer ground. But given the fact that we do have these models and hypotheses, I guess I don't understand the necessity.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that a little bit, we do currently have a series of competing hypotheses for abiogenesis. We do have thermodynamics and physics explaining how complexity can arise. It's disequilibrium thermodynamics has been around since I think 60s or 70s, showing how you can actually get self-organizing complexity in more less complex systems, actually getting very complex structures arising just due to the thermodynamics of the system. That's been around, a better part of half a century. We have models that have made predictions like the existence of a ribozyme, an enzyme made of RNA, was a prediction of the RNA world hypothesis. And then that was later found to be possible. So there are predictions made by these models that have been verified. We have seen we've seen the building blocks of life occurring at relative abundances in the universe. We've seen nucleobases and amino acids. We've seen naturally occurring catalysts that are capable of creating amino acid chains. We've seen actual encoded information come about, sequence information from these amino acid chains even before DNA. You can have these chains of amino acids encoding specific sequence information that can self-replicate and pass down that sequence information in a way that's like heredity, but without any DNA involved. Just a much more simple chemical system of just proteins. So in principle, we've seen all these things.
I have to stop you there. You're saying
sorry, come again?
That sorry. Did I understand what you were saying correctly? You said that we have evidence of amino acid chains being able to code and pass down information.
Yep. Google the amyloid world hypothesis. I plug that all the time. It's not a very well publicized hypothesis, but it has been published. There's a great review article on it by I think CPJ Mori in 2018. I want to say He has a great review article laying down all of the work that's been done in the amyloid world hypothesis before. But yes, he goes into details about. Sorry, did I just break up, or is it fine?
No, you're good. You're good. Keep going.
Yeah, he's gone into details about specifically how this happens. There are self-replicating chemical systems that do have properties of inheritance and heritability, even without any DNA being involved. So we know that, at least in principle, such chemical systems are possible and can be created spontaneously using only prebiotic catalysts. So it seems like we have all the pieces in place, like, where I don't see any necessity to claim that it requires a supernatural miracle to have a naturalistic origin of life. And just to address what you were talking about with value, like, personally, I'm like a fan of existentialist philosophy and being able to create your own meaning and values subjectively. But I want to ask you, do you not think that there is a possible universe where there is no objective value, but you had a naturalistic origin of life? I mean, what is contradictory about such a universe, which I would think is our universe, but obviously we might disagree on that. But what's contradictory about it?
Well, I mean, if they're like, okay, so I like, one of the things that I would say is I don't think we can evaluate, that possibility, because there's no evidence that that possible thing has potential to exist, right? Like, what does it even mean for a universe to have no value? Like, there would be no, I don't think there would be a capacity to evaluate if a universe had value in itself if it had no value, right? Like, there would, if it had a capacity to evaluate for value, then that means there's value in it.
I just stop you right there. Capacity. I want to be clear that we're talking about the same thing, right? We're talking about objective value. You can still have things that are valued in the universe, but they're just by subjective beings like us. Like, I can value things subjectively, so value can still exist in the universe. It's just not objective. So what is contradictory about not having objective value and a naturalistic origin of life? I don't see a contradiction there.
Yeah. I would say that, like, I would say any matter that exists without consciousness or anything to know that that matter exists, to me, essentially does not exist. It has no reason for existing. Anything that does not have value for its existence, it doesn't exist.
This is a very anti-realist philosophy you've got here. I don't know.
I mean,
I really don't understand.
Be if you couldn't evaluate it? It's like if you had a universe that, like we call the multiverse, and like you guys were discussing before, fine-tuning principles. Like, if there were so many different universes that have all these different laws of physics, whatever, right? Like, if there was nothing to evaluate the evidence or the existence of those universes, they might as well not exist.
So this feels like if a tree falls through the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound, right? I mean, objectively, it does. Like, even if we weren't here to view and appreciate all of what we consider beautiful about the universe, from sunsets to nebula, right? Nebulae, it would still exist, right? Just because we don't observe it doesn't mean it isn't there. I suppose this would be a difference in philosophy, right? Like, to me, value. Like, I don't really ascertain value in that way.
Yeah, like, okay, in my conception of the universe, right, I am an atheist, but there are the majority of the universe that we don't see or interact with at all. Like, there's tons of planets out there that there's no conscious observers going to visit. There's no tourists of any kind. That planet still exists, though. It's just, there's just no consciousness that is perceiving it. So why
that we understand or know of?
Right,
I'm just saying,
if we don't know it exists, I would give you this, because this is one explanation I've heard. I think maybe you guys have probably heard of it too, and like if you've debated other Muslims, but it is commonly spoken about the gambler's fallacy. If you see a person like on doing a roulette board, and every single time they win and they're in a casino, every moment they're winning, you wouldn't assume that on the next floor there's hundreds and millions of people losing every time just because one person has such a low probability of winning every time, and that's what we observe that individual doing. You would just see that one person doing something that seems unlikely. And I think that's the only thing we have the capacity of doing. I think we can only look at what is in front of us and saying, the existence of what we have, right, is valuable from what we can understand, right? Like,
I mean, that feels borderline solipsistic, right? Like, yeah, we don't know what we don't know, right? And we can't observe what we can't observe. But that ceases to be falsifiable to me, right? Like, if you want to propose the idea that some random asteroid in our asteroid belt is being valued by something or other that's dwelling on it, right? Like, until I can go out there and actually test that, I don't know, right? At present, that would be unfalsifiable for me. Conceptually, is falsifiable, but this idea of like value that is or isn't being appreciated, presumably by like God or like a deity, right? That they're the one that's valuing all of this stuff that perhaps we're not there to actually put value on or observe or what have you. That's completely outside of the purview of science, right? I mean that starts to get into the realm of like philosophy and things of that nature.
Depends on it.
I want to be be clear about something. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that is because then we would be working under a assumption that like anything and everything is possible. Like, why would we be able to move forward?
Why would that be the case?
Like for the example, like I know, at least because I've watched a couple of your videos, you study, ape evolution and human evolution, right? Like, we wouldn't be able to determine with any degree of certainty the possibility of anything because we can only look at the fossil record of what we see and like what we can evaluate. I think science depends on the fact that we can only ascertain what is available to us, what we find value.
Right. So I would agree with the first part, right? Like, we can only ascertain what we have, like what our senses and our instruments can tell us, right? Like, we can't know what we can't know. There's boundless things, I'm sure, that fall outside of the purview of things that we can even investigate because of our the limits of our physical bodies, right? Like, we can't very well go beyond the edge of what we perceive to be the expansion of the universe right now. But like that second part, that necessarily is intrinsically linked with what is valuable, I don't know that that's true. I don't see there to be a through line there. Like, to me, right, the fact that we use our senses to investigate all of these things around us, that simply is, right? Like, science relies on regularity, falsifiability, and presumes a natural explanation first and foremost. Those are your sort of Popperian values of like what you have to have in order to do science on something, right? I don't see, like, there's not a value criterion there.
And I just want to clarify.
There is simply okay. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify something about the gambler's fallacy, right? Like, that's like where there is an event of known probability, like an essentially random event, like a 50-50 coin toss. And when you like get 10 heads in a row, that does not affect the probability of that happening. But that assumes like that is a known fixed probability. Like, you can also do likelihood calculations based on previous experience. That's like Bayes' theorem in statistics. And that's how we do much of our reasoning, is by looking at previous events and using like previous knowledge to build our understanding of the likelihood of a certain outcome. So when we're using science and these naturalistic explanations, and time again, we're seeing that what we used to not know how it worked has a naturalistic mechanism to it that we can understand through science. It seems like the likelihood that abiogenesis is just another one of those processes is getting more and more and more, especially as we learn about, systems chemistry, chemical replicating systems, inheritance before DNA without using DNA, different prebiotic catalysts. I mean, as our knowledge of this field is growing more and more, it's looking more and more likely that there's a naturalistic mechanism for the origin of life.
And like the thing is that doesn't necessarily have to debase where you're coming from, right? Like I presume that this is actually what's going to happen. Like the second we create life in a lab, it's going to move to, well, how do you get the conditions for life, right? Like that's going to be the new, this is what is required.
Like the puddle.
God is required here, right? Yeah, like the puddle, right? Like it's going to move backwards in time. And like I'm pretty sympathetic towards science affirming Christians and Muslims and Jewish folks and Hindus and whatever. Like that's all fine by me. But the perspective that like abiogenesis is sitting on this ground that's just completely faith based, I think, at least in this conversation, and like neither Grayson and I are biochemist, folks working literally in the field of origin of life research.
I do
right?
have a degree in biochemistry. I'll clarify.
He has a degree in biochemistry, so you get to call yourself a biochemist then. So, but I'm not a biochemist. But like my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Grayson, right? But like where we're standing with origins of life research is like we're chugging right along, just like every other field is chugging right along. The characterization of it as being up a creek or whatever, I think is quite groundless, personally speaking.
Yeah,
and so we're left at this crossroads, right? Like we can either say, okay, here we have all of these hypotheses and models, all of them make predictions, some of them make accurate predictions and are continuing to stand the test of time. It is still moving forward, it isn't stagnant. And then on the alternative we have, okay, supernatural entity required, right? I don't think that if it's me making the choice here, right, I don't think that choosing the supernatural agents requirement in abiogenesis is necessary, is I guess what I'm trying to say here. Like we have these robust ideas that are standing up to scrutiny, right? That can, and they still have problems to them, right? That's just the nature of science, the nature of knowing, as Grayson said, like all science is provisional. And as I've said a gazillion times, that's the best part about it. That is the coolest part about science, is that it can change as new information comes to light. And so as you said at the beginning, like if we created life tomorrow in a lab, it would cease to require this miraculous agent. I await the day that I can bring that news to you, Martin.
Yeah.
And I do just want to hammer on home that there are and continue to be advances in the origin of life field. It's a very underfunded field, to be fair, but there still continue to be advances. Like that paper that I brought up to you before, that amyloid world paper by Mori, it was from like 2018. Like that's super recent. Like that's like a newer theory for abiogenesis just
It's like
within the last
model.
10 years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like it's like a
in the last
model.
10
Like
years.
not even a hypothesis, right? Like
Yeah.
cool. That's awesome. It's epic. Martin, thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry to kind of cut you off, but we've been going for a minute. We still have 2 calls that I'm hoping we can maybe zip through both of them. But we still have super chats, and I think we have quite a few of them, and I don't want to keep people here for like 3+ hours. So I'm so sorry, but we have to let you go. Thank you for the stimulating conversation, though. This was super enjoyable. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope you're staying warm wherever you are, because it's freezing where I'm at.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, you guys have a good one.
Take care, Martin. Okay. Did that scratch your abiogenesis itch, Grayson?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. Like I said, I probably should have said that I do have a background in biochemistry. I've worked in.
Why didn't I know that?
I've worked in like a biochemistry lab back in college. We were messing around with heme proteins, putting in like manganese instead of iron, and seeing how that affects like the structural biology of like the entire functionality of the protein. And I've also worked in a neuroscience lab for a couple years, just because I was super interested in neuroscience, and it was just like one of my favorite researchers and PIs. So I've worked in neuroscience a lot too. I basically, like I said earlier, that like learning new things is kind of like my favorite hobby. So even after I've graduated, I got my degree, I've still like audited courses at like my local university, just because super interested. So I've audited like quantum mechanics, and just this semester, last week, I started auditing a graduate level course in cosmology that I'm super excited about.
Putting a pin in that, Grayson, because this next question
Yeah.
is also for you. So, I mean, like,
Okay.
wow, you just gave me a segue. Like, I know you didn't mean that, but the next question is literally, did space, matter, and time have a beginning? Does that sound appealing to you?
Fun. Very fun, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm cutting you off from your academic journey, and I'm directing your force towards our next caller. So our next caller is
Awesome.
Ryan, pronouns he, him, from Oklahoma. He's a theist, and as I said, he wants to know if time, space, matter, time, space, matter, and time. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. If space, matter, and time all have a beginning. Welcome, Ryan. How are you doing? Ryan, are you there? Ryan, hello.
Oh no, I was super interested in his question.
Ryan, please
Can you hear
come
me?
back. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear
Okay,
you.
awesome. Sorry.
so
AirPods
tell us
are
a little
not
bit about
working
your question.
today, but it's not a thing.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, tech sucks. Mine is always on the fritz. Tell us a little bit more about your question.
I don't really have much to piggyback on it, to be honest with you, but I will just preface just a couple of things. Yes, you did say I'm a theist, but I would say there's multiple times, if not now, that there are a lot of kinds of skepticism. So I just have questions. I don't want to get into much of a debate or take up much time because I know you said you have others waiting. So for the sake of that, I just want to like it's kind of like yes or no, and then we can maybe just like talk about
Perfect.
it.
Okay, great. This is Grayson's question. This one's for him. So shoot. Did space, time, and matter have a beginning?
Maybe. So I can elaborate on that, but it's not really a good yes or no question because essentially, so the typical Big Bang model is billed as like the creation of space and time. And there are certain issues with that, largely because our physical descriptions of the universe and space-time in particular is through general relativity. And there's an issue with general relativity in that when you get to really, really small scales, general relativity just sort of breaks down. And when you're trying to trace back the history of like space and time, like when we look around, we can see space and time is expanding. The current expansion rate is about around 70 kilometers per second per megaparsec, which is like a huge amount of space. That's like or I think like 3 million light years. So every 3 million light years, every second, that's getting longer by about 70 kilometers. So that's really not much, but here's a big universe. So we can look around and we can see that, yeah, currently space-time is expanding. So naturally, rationally, when you trace that back, if you say in the past, space-time would have been, smaller and smaller and smaller. And so when you do the physics and you crunch the numbers for that, eventually you get so small that our best descriptions of the universe break down and it starts spitting out infinities in what's known as a singularity. Now, most physicists would not really say that a singularity is like a real physical thing that is actually existing. It's more of like a mathematical artifact coming from the fact that our mathematical descriptions are literally breaking. Like there is no quantum description of space-time. So on a very small scale, we don't know how to describe what space and time even is. Like, so that is the big problem with asking where does it originate from? And is there an origin for space and time? Because when you actually try to calculate that, eventually our math just isn't good enough. And we need mathematics of quantum gravity in order to cross that hurdle and actually begin to describe those very, very earliest moments to be able to answer whether or not space and time itself had an origin, or there could also be like there are other physically viable ideas like having like a tenseless amount where there's like time doesn't really have a tense. There's not a metric to it, and it's essentially infinite, even though it's not past infinite because there's no passage of time if there's a metricless like conception of time before this Big Bang expansion started happening. So yeah, it totally breaks down and boggles the mind when you're trying to think about these things. But yeah, right now, without a quantum theory for space and time, it's not going to be able to be a question that can be answered in a simple yes or no. But I want to just say that right now, on like the very like frontiers of physics, theoretical physicists are trying to answer the question of whether or not space and time itself could actually be emergent from more fundamental physics, and whether or not even like when you get to a small enough level, if space and time are even like a fundamental property of our universe, or whether or not like temperature is an emergent phenomenon. You only have a temperature when there's a bunch of molecules together. So maybe it could be the case that you only have space and time when there's a bunch of particles together interacting. And that interaction in some more fundamental physics is what space and time emerges from. So these are the big questions right now that physicists are still working on the answer for. I think your third thing after space and time was matter, in which case, yes, matter did have an origin because you can convert radiation into matter. E equals mc squared is pretty famous. And we've literally demonstrated that in a lab that you can get just, pure radiation, like photons of light, and you can convert them into matter. And we have seen sort of the afterglow effects of these, the very high energy density state of the universe cooling to a point where you can start to have atoms actually forming from this plasma. So like nucleosynthesis is the fancy scientific term for this aggregation of matter from more pure radiation at higher energies in the very early universe. So matter, yes, did have an origin point from, more pure radiation energy, but where that energy originated from, that is a whole open question. So hopefully you got something out of that entire breakdown. I know you said just a simple yes or no, but that's the simplest explanation I could give.
I got a headache out of that, Grayson. I got a headache and a surge of anxiety out of that. That I hate that.
Sorry for all
that.
the existential dread.
It's so like you said, it boggles my mind. My mind is like oozing out of my ears. Like that stuff's crazy. This is why I study monkeys, by the way, like and bones. I like my simple. It looks like this and it does this. No, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
I don't really, like I said, I don't really have much to like go. Obviously, I don't have anything to go against you, Grayson. And if we ever do find out the origin, at least I know where to look for it now. Would be probably you might be posting about it if we ever did find out. So I'll keep my eye out on that.
Absolutely, I will be posting about it. So actually, I'm really excited. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I think I may just have some like follow-up questions. I know they may take a little bit of time more than a yes or no, but I guess to just kind of piggyback on a lot of things you said, I was trying to like write down a few things to maybe say just like one or two questions. So you can agree that space and time and matter are all a real thing, obviously, so because you're living in time right now. So just without putting anything scientific into it, just me and you, man-to-man talk, would you want to say, yes, there was an origin, or it's been going on forever because it can only be one of the two? Would you say yes or no?
The only truthful answer I could give for that is I don't know. So we see the evidence that the universe was once in a much hotter and denser state of like plasma and radiation. We have that evidence. It's extremely definitive in the cosmic microwave background. We are looking for other sources that could potentially tell us what was happening before that. It's like a neutrino background or a gravitational wave background. We're making some strides in those directions. We could potentially learn a lot more about the early universe just in the next few decades from those lines of inquiry. But in terms of whether or not we will figure out definitively if the universe had a beginning, yes or no, right now the science is not clear on that. There is no evidence or reason to think that there was a definitive origin or beginning, or if there wasn't. Like there isn't enough to be able to say clearly yes or no. So the only honest answer I can say is I don't know.
Gotcha. I think that is the answer of a lot of people too, because it's one of those things that you can't empirically prove, obviously. So
To be
that's a question.
I'll clarify.
You know,
in principle, there are empirical ways to demonstrate that. It's just that so far we have not gotten that data. But in principle, there are ways. Like there's something like between like a 13 and a 30% chance that when we analyze the gravitational wave background, that our universe might be the type of universe that you could still detect some gravitational wave remnants from a previous universe. Like
it's
in
Hawking
principle,
radiation, right?
not it
Or is
with
that a
Hawking radiation. Yeah, it just like gravitational waves are like waves in the fabric of space and time itself. And so there's like a background, like a background hum of these waves that just permeates the entire universe. And literally just in 2023, we had our first hint of a detection of that background. It's an awesome experiment. But anyways, through that, there is a chance that that could actually show us evidence for the existence of previous universes before our own. It's not like a definitive thing, but in principle, there is theoretical physics describing that. And if our universe is such a universe, we could at least in principle detect it empirically. Sorry, that was a total derail.
No, dude, that's so
I was prepared for it to be.
It's so cool, but kind of spooky. I don't know. It makes me want to go inside and turn all the lights on. Like,
I'm super excited about all this stuff. Like, I talked about the cosmology course that I just started. Like, the professor for that course is like, he's like one of the leading experts on like testing general relativity on like cosmological scales, and he's like literally one of the scientists that's getting like firsthand data from basically the most advanced, most precise experiment of measuring dark matter that humans have done. It's called DESI, and like that is going to be publishing their first year of results, like I think in March or April. So I'm like, I mean, the fact that I get to like ask this guy like all these questions all day, and I get to like talk with him about all this, like, I'm like so beyond excited. So this is like one of the areas.
That is like that's the coolest thing when you actually you're getting to take a course from someone who's for a living studies the thing that you're impeccably interested in, and you get to like when a finding comes out, you get to be like, what did you think of this? Hey, I'm in your class. Tell me, did you see the paper that came out? Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you think so I can make it what I think. It's like,
and this almost kind of answers this question as well about the origin of space and time, because with space and time currently expanding, dark energy is what is driving that expansion. So you could kind of view that in a way of like more and more space and time is being produced continuously in an accelerating manner by dark energy. So like studying dark energy could actually help us figure out how this space and time is being created in order to continue expanding our universe at a faster and faster rate. So we could, make some headway there.
That's so spooky to me. Really cool. Ryan, did that answer your question?
I know that there wasn't going to be like a definitive answer, but it was fun to just kind of like pick the brain of somebody who is in this field, obviously studies a lot. But can I just ask like one more small question that kind of goes on with that?
Yeah, shoot.
So I'm kind of stuck on like the beginning and the end right now. So if I've talked about did space, matter, and time have a beginning, essentially did time have a beginning? Do you think that there's an afterlife as well?
An afterlife?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Personally, I do not. I think it makes way more sense to me that after I die, I'll go the same thing that will happen as before I was born. I just didn't exist. I have no memories or no experience before I was born. So it makes the most sense to me that that would also be the case for after I die. To me, that's not particularly scary because, like, why would I be scared of something that I'm not experiencing? So I personally don't have that much existential dread about it. I mean, if there is something, I'll meet it with a curious and open mind. I mean, I'll be game for whatever adventure lies after that. But if there isn't one, I'm not going to be super bummed about it either. I mean, just kind of.
Man,
I think it's. Yeah, sorry.
anything after this is just extra, right? Like, it's already incredible to be here at all. I already feel so lucky to get to experience the things that I get to experience, to live at the time that I live, right? And to be able to enjoy existence as it has been for me. I love it. I think it's great. But I'll die one day, all things do, right? And then either that's going to be it and it's going to have been a great ride and I'm going to, what amazing luck to have been able to have it in the first place, or there's going to be more and that's going to be wild and I don't know what that would even look like, but that's cool too. Sure. But yeah, I mean, we don't have. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just was going to make the point that I think that honestly, like, my life is better with me not believing that there is an afterlife, because I'm like living my life, like trying to take advantage of everything to enjoy it the most as I possibly can. And like, sometimes I think that it's actually like harmful in a way to believe that there is this afterlife, because if you're living your whole life on this earth for this afterlife that may or may not exist, like, a lot of things that you could be doing and dreams you could be pursuing and taking advantage of, like this potentially only shot that you have at it, you could otherwise be not pursuing because you're putting more value on an afterlife than on your current life. So, like, just carpe diem, baby.
Yeah,
Ryan,
those are both good points.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for calling in. This was a fun concept, a fun chat. But we do have one more caller to get to, so I'm really sorry. Thank you again.
It's fun.
Please take care and have a lovely evening. Grayson, you've hit the jackpot with the topics that you want to talk about. You got abio, you got space, like. Wow, that's not everybody. When Dan was on, he didn't get a single genetic entropy question. He was very sad about that.
Hey, the callers have really been coming through with some great questions, great conversations so far. So I'm grateful for everyone that's called in. You're right. This has hit almost all my favorite topics. I also big fan of the genetic arguments and genetic entropy arguments too. Yeah. So if anyone in the audience, trying to come at us with genetic entropy, do not hesitate.
Oh, I'd love it. I mean, I hope we get some super chats on it. The last caller that we have has a very broad topic, so we'll see what they have to say on that. But I wanted to ask you a question on cosmology, because the one that I really like, just conceptually, not because I think it has any particular support for it, but I like it as a concept, is like the Penrose cosmology, like with the brains in it, BRANES, right, where it's like the universe expands and then it contracts and then it expands and then it contracts, like a big heartbeat, and we lead these lives, and we might, in some dynamic force or in some weird way, our dynamic pattern emerges again in an infinite amount of time. I think that's romantic and I like it, but I don't think there's very much support for it, which is sad.
Yeah, Penrose is certainly like a very interesting and somewhat controversial figure, like
Yeah.
in the field. Like he's definitely like, I mean, Penrose diagrams are ubiquitous in the field. Like he's made some like major contributions, and he also has like some really out there ideas, like about
Yeah.
like consciousness being created in like the microtubules and cells and stuff. That's like really kind of out there, but um, yeah, I think specifically
Didn't know
his
that. That
conception,
sucks.
yeah, like his conception of the history of the universe and the
Yeah.
universes before this universe is really interesting. I think it's even a little bit more interesting than the way that you build it there, because it's not just like a big bang expansion and then a big crunch. His conception is like there's a big bang expansion up to the point where essentially like entropy has been maximized and
Hmm.
everything is completely homogeneous. And at that point, space and time cease to hold any meaning because everything is homogeneous in both space
Right.
and time. So then at that point, he basically is saying that is indistinguishable from a singularity giving birth to a new universe where you start with this lowest case entropy where everything is homogeneous and the same and there's no space and time. So it's not even like a
Yeah.
big crunch. It's like it
It's like
expands to the point.
conceptual, and then it expands again, and then it expands
Yeah, it's
again
like
because you're
an
reaching these.
inception of universes. It's
That's
definitely
so bizarre.
really. I also really like the idea that this kind of comes about through the holographic
Hmm.
principle, which is crazy in its own right. But basically, like an idea that our universe could be contained within or like making a part of a black hole in another universe. So we kind of have a parent
Oh, yeah.
universe, and these universes spawn black holes, which each contain their own universes, which spawn black holes. And in this way,
Right.
there's even people that have proposed a Darwinian evolution of universes, where each
This I've heard.
universe has
Yeah.
slightly different properties than its parent universe, and so you have sort of an evolution of
Select,
universes as
right.
you have each of these layers of black holes going more
There's
towards.
selection at the black hole universe level, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, you'd
oh
have
my
a
god.
selection that spawn more black holes. So yeah, that would be the selection pressure. So there's some really mind-boggling ideas about all this kind of stuff to contemplate and just feel very small and confused.
That very small and confused. You know what though? That's not any different from how I feel all the time. So what's a little bit what's a little bit smaller and a little bit more confused?
This is
So
kind of
our
like what I
last
said.
caller,
Oh, sorry.
our last
I
caller,
was just going to
Grayson.
tie back just really quick. Oh, okay.
Yeah, go. No, go. Do it.
Yeah, just really quick. I was just going to say this is somewhat what we touched about before about the psychology of having comfortable answers versus more honest
Yeah.
mysteries and questions. And personally, I mean, I'm a little bit of a psychological oddball on this one, but I would much rather have like the ability to contemplate super mysterious, super crazy, and mind-boggling open questions than have
Oh
like
yeah.
comfortable answers that I can just be like, yep, nope, I know it's all God. I don't need to question it. Everything is explained, yada yada. He just did it the way it is because he did it that way.
The mystery is what makes science so fun, right? Like that's why people like our curious nature. I think that's something that's quite inherent to humans. That's one of our traits dialed up to 11, right? Is we're lethally curious. We want to know, right? That's why people call into Skeptalk because they want to know.
Yeah.
So our last caller.
Great transition.
Yeah, this is a great transit. Do you like this, Grayson? You can tell I'm trained at this, right? Where I'm like, allow me to subtly and not at all obviously steer us towards the last.
No, it was well done. I'm impressed.
No. Thank you. You don't have to tell me. I already know. Our last caller, we've got a pre-supper, I believe, in this last caller. So I mean, this might end up being a train wreck a little bit. John, him from Texas, he's a theist. He feels that people are in denial and are refusing to accept God. So, John, tell us a little bit about that. If you are on the line. Wait, oops, I didn't add him. Sorry, John. Okay, John, now we have.
1 2.
You're good.
Okay,
we can hear you.
Yeah, so I started off the sentence with saying I feel like there are people who are in such a state of denial that they're rejecting the undeniable. Is that possible? Do you think that's possible that we could be in such a state?
I don't think so. The reason is
No.
because I think
Okay.
yeah, I think there are
I'm sorry.
people who are
Go ahead.
coming from so many different perspectives, right? That the fact that you've got so many various opinions across space and time for humans across all cultures speaks to an incongruence, that's probably better, to incongruence in our understanding and our perception of what the divine is or ought to be. So thus there is no ultimate truth that, half the world for their entirety, like through the entirety of civilization, in Central America or South America or China, these areas that, because I'm presuming you're speaking.
Wait, I don't know what you're referring to. I don't know what you're referring to specifically. I said people can believe in their own lies and they reject the truth. What were you responding to when I said that?
John, I'm saying that. Let me ask a question first. Actually, you're a Christian, right? Would that be a fair characterization?
No, I'm not a Christian. No.
Okay, what perspective are you coming from?
I mean, I'm a Native American, so I kind of really believe that there are a lot of spirits and there is a great spirit, and I do think we are polluting the land, and I think there is a lot of stuff that politically we should be addressing that we're not talking about. But when we're talking about God,
so you have from your perspective, is there like a chief level big man upstairs, like a deity, like an individual who is sort of your ultimate, like an ultimate authority?
I do believe in this aspect of infinity.
So
I think there is this infinite. Yeah, I think there is this infinite aspect that created everything, and
so
there is like this awareness that encompasses that.
Why has this perspective not been emergent in every culture?
Can you repeat that? I can't hear you.
Why has this perspective not been emergent in that way in every culture then? If everyone is simply denying an obvious truth.
Wait. You're telling me that throughout history, every culture hasn't talked about some kind of deity that lives in the sky that is eternal? Are you saying that that's not a thing that is emergent in every culture?
No, I'm saying there's a great amount of variation in it. Well, first of all, Grayson's right. It isn't.
Yeah, there's
but then
variations.
There's also a great amount
of course, there's variations. There's variations in everything. In any form of life, you're going to see variations in it. Even in perspectives,
who's right?
Like we could be in the same culture. We could wait.
Who's right?
Just talking about variations. When you talk, who's right? The fact that there is this emergent phenomenon that occurs, which refers to this infinite being, that is what's right. Like just because there's variations of this aspect of how we perceive it, doesn't mean that it's not correct.
Right, but some cultures and groups don't have a great being.
Can you give me an example of one of those? Other than atheists?
Well, atheists don't
even
believe...
atheists have the great... Wait, I thought atheists believe in the great spaghetti monster. So even that is like some kind of cosmic entity.
Are you trolling?
I feel like you might be trolling a little bit here, pal.
No.
But
I'm not.
If you're genuinely
okay, well,
not,
y'all are the ones that bring up the cosmic fucking space, whatever the fuck. I don't believe that. No, I don't believe in it, and I think y'all are the ones who are trolling whenever y'all bring that up. And I'm saying atheists are the only group of people who even ever bring up this dumb, ridiculous, what did you call it? Trollish thing, spaghetti space monster. Like no one believes in that other than atheists. Those are the only people who say that.
I don't think anybody believes in that.
Yeah.
Even if they did, that would be an example of this like unknowable cosmic entity, omniscient cosmic entity. Like that would technically fall under the same category if someone did believe in that, as these other cultures which you are claiming are basically converging on this same theme without even knowing it, right? So that would it's kind of funny that you're like spurning that idea because that would actually help your case. But your case is already somewhat unsalvageable because of what Grayson mentioned earlier, right? Which I'm sure you heard in the call, which is that there are cultures and groups of people who do not have this singular
Example?
like deity, omniscient deity within their belief system.
And I just want to clarify also, in terms of whether or not I'm denying the existence of such a grand god or deity, like, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like, I was not raised with much awareness of religious beliefs or whatever. So, to me, like, for me to believe something requires I have evidence or reason. So, unless I can see clear evidence or reason to believe something, then I have there is no reason for me to believe in it. So you're saying to me that I do have this evidence and this reason that I personally can tell you I am not aware of, but you're trying to tell me that I'm just in denial of it when it's like I have no reason to be in denial of that. It's just I'm not aware of any evidence or reasons. That's why I would consider myself an atheist.
Well, the reason why I say you're in a state of denial is because you're. Do you understand like your ideologies and your methodologies? Those two things go hand in hand. So like, if you do an experiment, you have to follow this certain ideology if you're going to follow the method, right? Do you understand that or no?
You mean like methodological naturalism, or like assuming that the laws of the universe don't change from one point in time to the other, like that kind of stuff?
I'm saying like science is based off of certain theories, right?
Well, science is based off the scientific method. That's not necessarily a theory in and of itself.
So
Okay,
science starts with an
so this is why
observation and then an effort to explain that observation by forming a hypothesis, making predictions, and then testing those predictions, right? And then if you get enough hypotheses that bear out, then you might end up with a theory, right? Which explains the bulk of those
exactly,
hypotheses. If you can do so mathematically, then you have
and
a
that's what I
law.
was saying. And that's
So
what
what
I
are you
was saying. There are these theories. There are these theories that we base science off of. There's observations, and then we draw these conclusions, and we make these theories based off of these
So
observations, right?
science isn't doing any of these things, right? Like science is just a way of knowing, right? That's actually what science means, right? It's a way in which we seek to understand the world around us. Methodological naturalism is the
Yeah,
best
it's a
way of
certain
doing that because
worldview.
it doesn't assume unknown entities, right? It assumes that any event that you're examining is going to have a natural explanation and therefore can be investigated by us as humans. It has regularity, it can be falsified, things that we talked about earlier.
It's
Right.
a certain
By the
belief
way,
system.
because I'm not a cultural anthropologist, I just Googled which societies in particular don't actually have like religion inherent to them or have rather personalized spiritualities rather than like a big omniscient deity. And there are actually boatloads more of them than I thought, John. So that kind of that kind of takes us back
Can
to
you
this
say
question
one?
of
Can you just say one of
yeah,
them?
yes, the Ionians.
The Ionians. That's like an ancient culture.
Yes. And if
Okay,
you
I'm gonna
want a
look them up
modern
later.
one,
I'll look it up.
then I'm probably mispronouncing it, but the Piraha, it's an Amazonian group.
The Piraha are
Okay.
especially renowned for this exact trait. Like the Ionians, I don't know. I mean, the Ionian school is kind of largely seen as sort of the birthplace of natural philosophy and explaining the world naturalistically without supernatural explanations. That's more of like a philosophical school like that led to Greek philosophy. But the Piraha, like, they are like renowned as this tribe in the Amazon that, like, the concept of a god or deities was like foreign to them. Like when missionaries went there and tried to evangelize, they literally had no concept for gods or deities or any kind of minds like personifying natural forces.
So, but this is critical, right, John? Because as you said in your question, right, in your opening implication, right, was that people are just denying the existence of this all-powerful being, who or whatever they may be. Does this all-powerful being just have a lot of disdain for the Piraha, right? Like this particular group that has not seemingly incorporated any sort of belief into their system? Or, because if not, then they falsify this idea that every person inherently has this understanding that there is this greater unknowable or somewhat knowable entity that is omniscient, right? They should not exist under the worldview that you presented initially.
I didn't say everybody knows. I said there are people who are in such a state of denial that they reject the undeniable. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I want to say I'm not disagreeing with you that there are some people who are completely just unaware of the truth and they're incapable of even being aware of it. Of no fault of their own. So
your understanding, everybody either knows about it and accepts it, and knows about it, or denies it, or doesn't know about it.
Yeah, that's how the truth works. Either you know about it, you accept it, you know about it, and you understand it, or you don't know about it at all. That's what you call the truth.
Well, no, you either know about it and accept it, you know about it, you don't accept it, or you're ignorant to it. You said the same thing twice initially.
That's what I just said. Okay,
no,
well, that's what I
meant
to say. I'm sorry if I
no, it's okay. I understand what you were going for.
Yeah, I meant to say that.
And your idea is that the thing that these people are all either aware of or not aware of is this all-powerful deity. That would be your hypothesis here? Because you've already
infinite,
changed
like
it a little.
Someone was just speaking about let's talk about scientifically speaking. Like, you were just talking about the expansion of the universe, right? What shape is the universe? Because y'all want to act like y'all know about what the hell is going on around you. What shape is the universe supposed to be if it's expanding in every direction?
Well, before Grayson touches on that, right? Like, you've already pivoted on this, right? Because initially your point was every culture recognizes this all-knowing deity, right? And then you get confronted with one, two, actually, but certainly one that doesn't, and then you pivoted, right?
No,
so like,
I said throughout history there has been
we're moving forward with the understanding that we're moving forward with the understanding that there are groups that do not accept or do not understand or basically who don't conform to this idea that
I accept that. Yeah.
So let's move forward.
Throughout history.
Tell us a little bit about the shape of the universe.
Yeah. So this kind of underlies like a sort of faulty premise of the idea that the universe is like a three-dimensional object that exists in space, which is not the case. I mean, outside the universe doesn't make sense, because if the universe contains all of time and space, there is no space outside of that from which you could go to look at the shape of the universe. Like, when you're talking about like space and time,
so then you're saying it's flat.
You don't get to just interrupt mid-sentence here. I'm almost done.
I'm sorry.
You can respond. So
my bad.
When you're talking about the universe as all of space and time, right, is part of the universe, there is no space that you can just get a different view of it at. There is no, like, the universe is not just a three-dimensional object existing within space that does have a bit of shape. Yeah, like, it's a malformed question.
Okay.
It's amorphous.
So
because
is it a four-dimensional object? Exactly.
Is there
what else do?
Four-dimensional object.
Wait, I want to ask you what
object.
What else can we perceive that expands in all directions? What's it called? Equally in every direction.
Well, most gases do that when you're in a room, right? Like, they expand equally in all directions. They run out of substance and then they're equally dispersed. But like, expansion is a pretty universal principle.
But I also don't understand
why.
I don't understand
bubble is
why
the point.
Something else. Like, why do we need another example of space-time expanding? Like, I don't understand what you're
if you're saying that the universe is expanding in such a way that the universe is a bubble shape. That's the point I was making. The universe should be in such a way that it is like a bubble. If it's expanding in every direction equally, it would be forming a circle. That's what a circle is.
A bubble has an edge. It has a definitive boundary to an end. Like the universe does not have an edge. It doesn't have a boundary where you just hit the edge of the bubble like universe. It's not the universe is not a
What are you talking about? Yes, there is. The universe is made up of matter.
Yeah, where's the boundary?
The boundary is matter. Is literally the boundary is matter. Like if there is no matter, there is no universe. I don't know how y'all don't know what the universe is.
None of that logically followed. I just want to be clear. You could totally have a universe with no matter. That was just
without matter. So how would that work? How would that work?
It wouldn't be matter.
Walk me through that real fast.
Matter is not the only state of existence for things to be, right?
Energy,
like that's not
matter. Energy is matter. Energy equals matter. So if there is no energy, there would be no universe.
No, they are not interchangeable, right? Like energy, like radiation, become matter.
Equals MC
but they're not the same thing.
They're not simultaneously both.
Like so energy I can have some kind of matter without energy.
Okay, John, let's let Grayson talk here for a minute so he can clarify, having a background.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear this.
Energy is an attribute. Okay, John.
Hey, we're gonna let him talk.
Energy is an attribute that matter has, right? Energy is like measured in joules. Like it's not like an entity into it of itself. Like if you talk about like something that is not matter that still has energy, you're talking about like radiation, like photons of light. So you could theoretically have a universe that was nothing but radiation with no matter present. There's nothing impossible about such a universe. You can still have space, time, and radiation. Such a universe is not logically incoherent or logically impossible.
Gravity isn't matter or energy either. It's a fundamental force.
Yeah.
I mean, am I right on that, Grayson? Like, gravity's not either.
Okay. If you want to be super technical, gravity is a pseudo force. It's like a little bit different than the other fundamental forces. But sure, I mean, it's it's largely fits the point. Like the idea that just because there's matter in the universe, that necessitates that the universe have some sort of physical boundary, it does not logically follow, and there's no evidence or reason to support such a conclusion.
Well, in our understanding of where the boundary of the universe currently is, let me finish real fast, John. Our understanding of where the boundary of the universe currently is has to do with the tools available to us and the limits of the speed of light, right? Like it's not that there's nothing beyond what we can see; it's that we can't see beyond what we can't see, right? Like, or what we can't see.
Yeah, it's more of it's a limit in our ability to detect, or it's like a limit in our epistemology of the universe. Less so than being an actual physical boundary of the universe.
Right.
Okay. Do you agree with me that science is like a certain worldview? It's a way of looking at the world and understanding it.
Science is a way of knowing. It's one of our means by which we understand the world around us. And it can be incorporated with other means as well.
Yeah, science is a.
Do you have a problem with saying worldview?
My experience, worldview tends to be rather all-encompassing. You can have science in your worldview, or you can take a worldview that puts science more centrally, but like it's not in and of itself a worldview. No, it's a way of understanding the natural world in particular. Like you can have a religious worldview and then also utilize science.
Okay, I guess.
Like secular humanism.
I'm not trying to argue about it.
Okay, kind of seems like you are. It kind of seems like that's exactly what you're here to do.
No, I think science does tend to have certain worldviews, and if you stray from that perspective, then you are considered like crazy or an outcast to
So,
the mainstream.
Not.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
I'd like to make the point that among scientists, right, like people following the scientific method for their career, you can find Christians, you can find Muslims, Hindus, atheists. You find people that believe in ghosts or other supernatural phenomenon or aliens or higher dimensions, whatever. Like all of those people are still practicing science with like radically different worldviews. They all have different worldviews, but their worldview is not science. Their worldview is composed of all the other aspects of how they see the world. Like, it doesn't.
And the ones
Science
that
does
are
not.
the ones that are really good conform to methodological naturalism when they're in the lab, and when they leave the lab, then they pick up their other perspectives, right? Or like they keep them as non-overlapping magisteria, as it were. Right? I've studied human evolution. My department is biological anthropology, and I've said this many times before. I've got Christians in my department, Buddhists, Jewish people. We have one Hindu person as well, right? Like people are coming from all different perspectives, right? And they're still doing great science. So no, science does not have to be this worldview that is all about conformity, not in the slightest.
Okay, so this is why you said in the beginning that I might be a what did you say? Presuppositionalist?
Yeah, presuppositionalist.
I don't know how to say it right.
Yes.
Yeah,
presupposition.
and that is that not a worldview?
Being a presuppositionalist is a worldview. You kind of took it in a different direction than I thought you were going to take it in. So that one's on me. I thought you were going, in sort of the Christian version that I tend to see of that, which is like, everybody knows God and the people who aren't Christians are choosing to deny him. That's typically how that goes. You took that in a different direction than I anticipated. But yes, being a presuppositionalist is a specific type of worldview within
that scientists hold of science, right? When they say like this is objective and reality works like this because I pre-assume this is how things work.
So that is actually fundamentally the opposite of science, John, because science is provisional. Science makes something based off of our understanding,
go ahead.
But ultimately it is always subject to change. Always.
I agree with that, but you understand that the foundations of science is math and philosophy?
You might be able to say that the foundation of science in some way could be like logic or something like that, because you do need certain
what is logic rooted in? The laws of logic is rooted in philosophy.
Well, no, it's rooted in like
what
maybe
is the laws of logic rooted in then?
It's hard to talk when you talk over us, John.
Yeah,
sorry. Okay, I'm gonna mute. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of a lag over here. I'm gonna mute up. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead, Grayson.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, in order to do science, there are certain like assumptions that need to be made about like you have to be able to have like a rational process and follow steps of logic. Like, I mean, like an inductive process. Yes, so those do rely on certain metaphysical axioms, but like again, that's not really the same as saying that you have a worldview.
And
because
axioms are
science is not
axioms a fancy way of saying an assumption.
No, so science is, as we said earlier in this conversation and earlier, right? Science is a way of knowing, and if you're going on like Popperian principles, right, then in order to do science, right, in order to apply science to a thing, it needs to be observably regular and it needs to be falsifiable. And you assume that there is a non-supernatural cause, a naturalistic cause to it. Those are the three assumptions to perform the scientific method on something, at least as I teach them in my labs, right? That's how we do it, right? Those are assumptions, right? That doesn't mean that you can't investigate something not using those assumptions, but because those assumptions are inherent to science, it means that in order for your investigation to be scientific, it must meet those criteria, right? Like that's just categorically what science is.
Yeah, so I think just to hammer this home, like the assumptions that you need to have in order to do science do not prescribe that you hold those same assumptions in the other areas of your life. Like,
Right.
just because in order to
Exactly.
do science, you have to assume that there's not a supernatural mechanism for what you're looking at, that doesn't mean that the scientist doing that cannot believe in supernatural mechanisms. Just in order to do their science, they're not looking at those mechanisms then. That doesn't mean that it has to prescribe what worldview that they hold.
Yeah, that's not my
Otherwise, you
argument.
couldn't have different worldviews and be performing science, be doing science.
That's not my argument. I'm saying to hold science has a specific worldview which says all things are objective, and we go based off of these axioms. Axioms are assumptions. Assumptions are based off of things we can't prove. These are
Who's holding
akin
science as
to
a
beliefs.
worldview?
What? I'm walking you through this whole thing right now.
But like
No,
the
I'm saying
very first step,
who?
the very
Yeah.
first step that you said is what we disagree with. You're saying science is
Yeah.
a worldview. We're saying no, it's not.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's why we keep
So
going back to this, because you're moving past step
science,
one when we haven't established
this
step one.
wait, but the foundations of science says like things are objective and logical, right? There can't be like we can't do
We
science
just
if
went
it's
through the
illogical,
steps.
if it doesn't follow these certain mathematical what?
We
Sorry,
just
what did
went
you
over
say?
what science is. We just went over the steps of science, right? We just went over the assumptions that science makes. Was there anything in that that said that everything has to be objective and viewed through this specific lens?
That's
Falsifiable,
like
right?
what science
Naturally
claims.
occurring
That's what
and
science
regular.
claims to be.
Who is this science? I've not
Science
met this
claim
person. Who's claiming this?
Are you just saying that in order to do science, you have to assume that like there's a world outside of yourself, like there's an objective reality that exists?
I'm saying that
Are you
there's these
saying
specific worldviews, yeah, and this objective worldview that we hold, which is everything is separate from us, it is a certain way of looking at reality than actually understanding that we are connected to everything. There is this universal consciousness, like you were talking about integrated information theory. Yeah, you're right. You don't know what that means. You're talking about it and you don't know what the hell you're talking about, because literally that actually
Wait,
supports
what
you
did I
talking
say
about
about it?
how
I said
DNA.
that hey John, hold on. What did I say about it? What I said about information theory was you can go and watch a great series of videos, series of lectures by someone who studies this for a living, right? Like, it's not a dunk to say you don't know what you're talking about when I say I don't know what information theory is, right? Like, that's not my field.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know what it is, because literally you wouldn't
You're
have brought it
right.
up
I don't have a
as.
background in information theory.
Also,
Are you
I
suggesting?
agree with you.
What you've
I was
already characterized of being like my worldview is already wrong about my worldview. You said that I consider myself to be separate from the objective reality and we're not all interconnected, when I absolutely do not believe that is the case. So you've already mischaracterized what I actually think is my worldview, which is,
Common
again,
necessitate it.
like
What
even
you're saying,
beyond
I feel like I'm getting attacked
even
right
just
now.
all that. I mean, like, you know, if fundamentally we're all coming from like the same source, like of, you know, energy of radiation of some kind of unified field, then like there is a sort of monist aspect to that we would all just be like differentiated iterations of the same basic thing. Like, again, that is maybe part of my worldview, but that's not part of science, because here's the key: science is not a worldview. It doesn't inform your worldview. I have my own worldview that's independent of science.
Science is a tool.
Okay, I'm not gonna argue what a worldview is then, if you are so hung up on that specific
But John,
terminology that I brought to the table.
It's
I
step
thought
one,
that
right?
was like, John, I thought that you came on to try to make the argument about worldviews. So I'm confused. I don't understand why you called then. What were you trying to ask about?
The literal like title was supposed to say you're in such a state of denial that you're rejecting the undeniable, and that was going into this whole aspect of you have this certain methodology and this ideology that you use to confirm what truth is, and this is the scientific method, and anything that does not conform or like echo in the halls of what is it called, academia, is not going to be acknowledged or even recognized as something that is actually possible. Like that's the thing that happens with.
This is like, this is like saying that the Academy Awards aren't recognizing enough books, right? Like at the Oscars, they focus on ranking movies.
Okay.
Science focuses on things within the purview of science, right? If you want to talk about the supernatural, like there are other places where people discuss that kind of stuff. You can go to
I'm not talking about
talk to
supernatural.
philosophers or religious folks or whatever.
I'm not trying
John,
to talk about
sounds
this.
like
I'm literally
Walt
saying, like, literally,
Wait,
if I was a time traveler, if I was a multi-dimensional time traveler, and I was like, yo,
Let's
I'm fucking
Grayson.
in a whole
All right,
nother dimension.
I'm gonna have to mute him for a second. Okay, go ahead, Grayson.
Okay, I do want to hear about your multi-dimensional time traveler, John, but I just want to make,
letting Grayson talk.
I want to make this point really quick, okay? You're saying that, like, and we agree that science is a method of, like, developing truth, right? There's a certain scientific method, but that method cannot uncover all truths. There are limits to the scientific method. There are truths out there that science isn't capable of addressing. That doesn't mean that in the scientific worldview that you have to just say that those things are not true, those things can't exist. It's just that science is not the proper tool to use to address them. And science doesn't preclude you having any ideas or beliefs about supernatural things in it. It's just not part of science. But science is not a holistic worldview. That's why you can have all these other ideas for all these things that are outside of the purview of science in your worldview, because science is not a worldview.
It's not a worldview.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna unmute him here. Okay, John, you're not muted anymore. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would strongly disagree and say I would say to you who believe strongly in science, it does shape your worldview. If you have certain ideas on how reality works, and someone tells you, "Yo, I experienced this," you're gonna be like, "Well, based off of my understanding on reality, aka science, I'm not going to accept that as truth or proof." Like, again, I want to say this. If I'm a multi-dimensional time traveler who came in from a whole nother timeline, from a whole nother dimension, and I was like, yo, I'm in another world. There is no way for you scientifically or for me to prove it to you or to show it to you because you're lacking this experience. I can't reproduce this thing that happened to me.
There are so many ways.
There's a lack of science.
From another time to prove that, right? Like if you were from the future, I could say, okay, then tell me some large event that's about to happen, right? Like you could actually test that. A better example would be if I came, if I said to you that there is
alternate timeline. I said I'm from an alternate timeline.
Let's say I said to you, John, that there's a unicorn
isn't going to be the same.
You can't see, right? And whenever you turn to look at it, it disappears. What if I said that to you?
I just want to clarify that, like, I feel like I literally just described this. I mean, it does, even if your example is flawed or whatever, what you were trying to describe is exactly what I just acknowledged. There are things that are outside of the purview of science, and that doesn't mean that science precludes them from being real or existing. Like,
it's not.
I feel like I just acknowledged that. And also, I feel like you've, like, moved the goal.
Wait. So are you acknowledging me? No, wait, sorry. Are you acknowledging me as a potential time-traveling dimension hopper, then? If you're saying that science acknowledges potential things that people subscribe to be...
All right. I feel like this might be getting into troll territory here, John. I don't know.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. No, you don't accept it. No, you don't. You're lying. You say you do and you don't.
Grayson, I think I'm gonna.
Wait. Let me just ask. Are you, John, an interdimensional time traveler?
Don't leave us in suspense.
Have you time jumped? Have you gone to a different dimension?
He left.
Okay.
That means yes, by the way, Grayson. We sussed him out and he bailed.
Wow. I mean, I feel like I acknowledged exactly what he was talking about. And the fact that he moved the goalpost from saying that science is a worldview to then modifying to say, oh, well, science can influence your worldview was kind of slippery. Grayson, how he's picked up on it.
Those goalposts were on wheels, right? Like the goalposts moved 3 or 4 times. Like first it was like there are no such things as any society through history that does not have religion or the acknowledgement of like greater beings except atheism. So then we bring up some of those. Okay, well maybe there are, but what I'm actually talking about, we just go down the line and move the goalposts until the end there. I mean, I feel like he was kind of just determined to get in a fight, to be honest. Like I think he wanted that to be more incendiary, and like I don't think either of us were in the mood to just like sling insults or whatever, and that's fine. Like but no, I mean, you did, both of us said, we were like, okay, like non-overlapping magisteria, right? Science is looking at this, other aspects of human society can make questions about other things, right? That's not what science is about. And then he's like, it's a worldview. What would you do if I said I was and what do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, I'm worried that we might have passed up our chance to interact with a multi-dimensional time traveler, but I'll try not to dwell on that too much. All of the knowledge that he could have provided us.
He is not beating the not being an international or an interdimensional time traveler allegations by bailing the second you asked. That's not.
I know. He's like, oh, they're on to me.
Beating the allegations. He was like, oh, crap, I didn't think they were going to actually ask.
I got to admit, though, I was really thrown when you asked him if he was a Christian, and he said no. I was like, whoa, like this is different.
I was No, this is what I'm saying, right? Like, I made the assumption, I was like, he's a preceptor, it's going to be the usual song and dance, it's going to be the Darth Dawkins, shenanigans here. And then he was like, no, I'm not a Christian. And I was also like, wow, okay, well, we're pivoting then. We're going to talk about something else. But you always get something new on Skeptalk, even if it's like, I wonder if the interdimensional time traveler rules are like the movie version of if someone asks if you're a cop, you have to say it, right? So it's like by asking, you compromised him and he had to get out of here, like ASAP.
It's like I often kind of feel this way, like having a channel where I debate all of these pseudoscientific type arguments. I oftentimes, and I like people oftentimes will tell me like in the comments, like, oh, Grayson is so patient with these people. And I do not feel that I'm being patient. What I genuinely feel like from my perspective is like, I'm just so fascinated in like how some of these people's like minds work that it's like, when you're on a highway and you're driving by like an accident and you just like cannot help but like stare at it with some like morbid curiosity. Yeah, it's like that. Like, I'm just like, when some people start talking to me about the things that they believe or that their logical like process of how they got there, I'm just like, this is fascinating. Like, I oftentimes, and again, I don't mean this like to dehumanize the people that I talk about, but I oftentimes feel like Jane Goodall, like observing like chimpanzees and being like, wow, this is a new one. This is a new behavior. Like, I like feel like this is fascinating. Just like from like, it's like people watching, but you're like brain picking them. You're like, like what, how do you work? How do these gears be turning in your head? Like,
and it's such a unique experience to be thrown after doing it for this long, right? You can still get thrown through a loop, or someone will say something and you'll be like, wow, I don't really know how to respond to that, actually. Like, give me a second. I need to catch up mentally. Like,
I feel like I've been doing this for a little over a year now. I feel like I've been like collecting all of these like Pokemon characters of like different arguments, worldviews. And I still like getting thrown like, oh my God, I was in Discord the other day and I came across a guy who was with a straight face trying to make the argument that the Sumerian kings list was true and real. And like that these ancient Sumerian kings had reigned for like 36,000 years and 12,000 years. I'm like, just like how does a person get there? How do you get
You're like,
to that?
genuinely, this is new.
Yeah, I just it's fascinating to me. Like it is just morbid curiosity
So
of like,
nothing will beat for me my pinnacle experience of doing debates like online, right? Back when I was like doing debates regularly, when there were like people to debate that didn't involve going on channels that I didn't want to go on. It was me and Jordan, and we were talking to and Matt Dillahunty actually ended up debating the same guy who did the same thing. But the river rocks are actually like petrified hearts guy.
Howard.
And when Howard, and when he whipped that out, you could have knocked me over with a feather, dude. I was like, am I like being punked right now? This is insane. This is actually crazy. That was like, you were talking about collecting Pokemon, right? This is the shiny for me. This was like a shiny encounter. Wow. And the presentation, and like, I kept waiting for the other foot to drop, right? And for him to be like, LOL, JK, what I'm actually talking about is this. But no, it went down to sawing the rocks in half and seeing the chambers preserved in both halves of the river rock heart. And then he was like, 70% of rocks look like this. You're telling me 70% of rocks are petrified hearts? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
For those of you that maybe don't know, I mean, but Howard, for the record, has called into the line before. I think it was on an episode with Forrest Valkai, and that was hilarious. For those of you that don't know, okay, I like to think of like young Earth creationism as like a gateway drug. It makes you like, once you've questioned scientific institutions enough, like, and you say, oh, they're all lying about evolution, that just opens the floodgates for you to believe all kinds of wackadoodle stuff. Like
100%.
The next step is like flat earthers. And Howard, guess what? He is a flat earther. But even again, once you've become a young Earth creationist, once you've accepted the flat Earth, the level above that is the mud fossils, where you think, hey, all these rocks that kind of sort of look like hearts, and this rock that looks like a dolphin, and this one that looks like an elephant, that's because they all...
The island that was shaped like a dolphin, it's actually a giant petrified dolphin. Yeah. Or like the Devil's Tower, it's a chopped down tree, right? Like it's a big tree stump.
Oh my God, Erika, like literally, even on this, all goes full circle right now, because whenever I went to Dinosaur Adventure Land and I was on the tour with Kent, the guy who was with us asked Kent, he's like, oh yeah, do you think that Devil's Tower was a giant tree stump? Because he's literally one of those guys. And Kent had to tell him, no, that's stupid and ridiculous. And like, I'm like, when Kent Hovind is telling you your idea is too stupid and ridiculous, like you got some deep soul searching to do.
Wow. Like, I actually don't think the barrel gets any deeper. Like you know, the bar is in a pit in the basement, and this guy's like at the core of the earth. Like that's some crazy shit. Wow, to be a fly on the wall for that. Like, well, okay, let's get into some super chats, shall we? I'm sure we've got some to get through. So let's get started with these super chats when they start popping up. Wonderful. $10 from Matters Now. Grayson's video about magnets and Trump was golden. So funny. Same with this short about the Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain? Is that my saying that right? Pontchartrain Bridge showing curve, because people believe that still too. Grayson, take the compliment, please.
Well, thank you very much for that one. Yeah, if people are not aware, Trump recently made the comment that the only thing, and this is a direct quote, the only thing he knows about magnets is that if you got a glass of water and you dump it on the magnets, no more magnets. So I just did a small empirical test and put some magnets in water, and what a surprise to everyone. Don't get your scientific advice from Donald Trump. And then with the Lake Pontchartrain Bridge, so the Pontchartrain Bridge is the longest bridge in the United States. So it's actually long enough when you're like standing at the base of it, you can actually see the curvature of the Earth as the bridge goes over the horizon. So this is like, flat earthers hate it, but it was really cool. It was part of a big like road trip that I went to. Like whenever I went to Dinosaur Adventure Land, I stopped by Lake Pontchartrain. It's like north of New Orleans. And I stopped by LIGO, which is like the gravitational wave detector. That's in Louisiana too.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
that was super cool. I got to take a tour and go into the control room, and I got to see a Nobel Prize like in person, which was a first and super cool.
Ooh, I don't think I've ever seen a Nobel Prize in person, or if I have, I didn't know it. It might have just been in the room. $5 from Matt B. Erika, what do you think of the Oklo natural nuclear reactor that occurred 2 billion years ago and the potential for it to cause bacterial diversity due to radiation? So the Oklo natural nuclear reactor is actually one of my favorite like random arguments. I've been meaning to do a bite-sized bust on it for quite some time. Arguments against young Earth creationism, because it's actually such a good way of showing that like, no, our decay rates have actually not changed over time, because it's a natural nuclear reactor. I believe it's in the Congo. But I actually didn't know that it had been proposed as like a potential for bacterial diversity due to radiation, like increasing mutagenesis, and like maybe that might have had an impact on like some early life around 2 billion years ago. I'm not sure about that, because I think if you were going to argue that, you would want it to be more in the recent past, like around when you start to see more complex eukaryotes and like multicellular life, like if the argument was going to work that way. Because like I don't know how we can actually test this, because most of the bacterial remains like pre-Ediacaran, maybe a little earlier than that, are like stromatolites and things like that, and like trace fossils. So I'm not sure how you would test it. It's a cool idea though, so I like it. Thumbs up.
Also,
Fun.
like mutation rate itself can evolve and be optimized. So there are also certain like feedback mechanisms that might be selecting for like certain like biochemical alterations that would counteract those effects to sort of control the mutation rate back down to a more optimal level. So like mutation rate itself is something that is subject to selection pressures and can actually fluctuate up and down over time depending on what's most ideal for fitness of the population.
$5 from the can. Theists bring up Sanford from the Discovery Institute as proving evolution false. I've heard scattered dismisses by actual biologists. Is there a concise response to read? So I'm assuming this is John Sanford, the genetic entropy guy and inventor of the gene gun, which is always brought up in tandem with John Sanford. So the quickest bust to genetic entropy, honestly, the most concise one and the easiest one to remember, is that genetic entropy, which is the creationist idea put forward by Sanford that all organisms are decaying and thus evolution bad. You can't evolve or select for something that's basically in an error catastrophe spiral. Except for genetic entropy to work as an idea, even conceptually, you have to redefine the definition of fitness, which is one of the core concepts within evolution. So they're not even touching evolution. They've literally strawmanned evolution and are arguing with that by changing the definition of fitness to be not context specific, as we understand fitness to be, but some ultimate, fastest, strongest, smartest organism, which is just not at all how any of this works. That's my favorite quick bust of Sanford, is that his core idea, genetic entropy, and that's what's found in his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Cell, fails because it requires a redefinition of a core concept in the argument he's trying to debunk. Thus, he's not actually debunking the argument, right?
Plus, like any study that has empirically measured mutation load in an organism over time has debunked genetic entropy. So basically, like every analysis of ancient DNA or just with, a population of bacteria, testing what the mutation load, which is like kind of like a rough estimate of the amount of slightly deleterious mutations in your genome and how that changes over time, shows that these things actually reach an equilibrium and they don't just spiral out of control. There's like mutation selection and mutation drift threshold balances that maintain an equilibrium in mutation load over time. This is not a runaway spiral effect. It's never been observed like that to be such. So it's like empirically and theoretically, the idea has been thoroughly discredited.
Well, they've resorted with that to just saying that genetic entropy doesn't work on bacteria and sometimes viruses, and sometimes they'll even be like, yeah, and like small mammals, maybe genetic entropy doesn't work on them either. So what does it work on, right? Like, what is genetic entropy actually at play?
And also ancient humans, because we have a whole burgeoning field in the last 15 years of like archaeogenetics, which the entire field is just one enormous debunk of genetic entropy.
Well, and it's funny because for this reason, Nathaniel Jeanson, one of the other big creationist geneticists, who I don't think he's typically cited by the DI. I didn't even know that Sanford was regularly cited by the DI. Usually the intelligent design people try to keep their noses clean from creationists, young earth creationists. But yeah, like some of these guys will just be like, aDNA is actually too contaminated. No, it's not. We've gotten so many different samples from so many different populations that corroborate one another in conserved regions. They're not contaminated and they're not too degraded either. So, okay, $5 from Alyssa Nguyen. If God existed, there would be documented cases of drownings from pool ladders disappearing without explanation. #ResBud, #Motherload, #caching. Yes, thank God we don't live in a Sims 2 simulation. Or else we would be toast, especially if someone like literally anybody who has fun playing Sims 2 was in charge.
This is kind of a point. Like I often will come across people saying that like supernatural miracles are not like you cannot test them empirically, and I'm like, well, no, there are some. Like if I made the claim that I had supernatural powers, and every time I clapped my hand, a sandwich would appear, that's empirically testable. I can clap my hand and we can see what happens. So like, isn't it a weird coincidence that all of the most persistent supernatural miracle claims are specifically the ones that are not empirically testable? Isn't that just so weird?
It's really strange. It's odd that those are the ones that persisted through time. All right, $5 from Mystic Mind Analysis. Is evolutionary psychology junk science? I've heard mixed opinions on it from fellow skeptics. Evolutionary psychology is extremely difficult to prove or provide like support for. There's a lot of speculation involved in it, and because of that, it tends to be misused a lot to explain away people's behavior. So I tend to steer clear of evolutionary psychology. It's fun to talk about, and it's fun to kind of engage with. But I think anytime you're talking about evolutionary psych, you have to keep in mind that very little of it can be robustly supported unless you're talking about some pretty serious like psychology or neurology studies that are like linking to specific portions of the brain and like cross species analysis as well.
Yeah, like
what are your thoughts on Evo psych, Grayson?
On like an extremely general level, like it does make intuitive sense that like elements of different species psychologies would be affected by evolution and selection. But when you're trying to like pin it down on specifics and trying to make claims about like actual people's psychologies based on evolutionary principles, it just becomes such a messy, multivariate situation. Like people's psychology is so complex that trying to reduce it to certain like overarching evolutionary selective pressures that affect entire populations can sometimes just be a fool's errand and sometimes lead to like really like sus science.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, you'll find that people who are utilizing it aren't familiar with like the ancestral behavior that they're trying to invoke, you know? So they'll be like, ooh, alpha males because, you know, baboons have alpha males. And it's like, okay, well, you're a couple of tens of millions of years off on that one, but it's fine. Yeah. €5 from Ekril Poe. Ekril Poe. I hope I'm saying that right. Maybe something only humans do, prosthetics, replacing body parts or enhancing body parts. I agree, but I would also lump that into like medical care and altruism for others within your group. That would be my thinking.
I think that there might be certain kinds of like collector crabs or whatever that maybe will like lose limbs and then they'll put stick a little object, like those types of crabs that will collect objects and stick them onto themselves. I think that you could make an argument that, I don't know, they're doing something similar to prosthetics whenever you have an instance of a missing limb or whatever, but that would just be speculation on my part.
$20 from me and my human. More Erika and Grayson, please. Well done, guys. Thank you for a great show. Heart clap, heart clap, heart. I hate that I have to go to work, but look forward to catching up soon. Thank you very much. It was a great show. I had a blast.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, this was my first time on the line, so I'm really happy that the first one was something enjoyable for the viewers. And obviously, this is also the first stream I've done with Erika, so I'm just super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Erika. I've definitely been a fan of your channel for like longer than I've been doing this with my own channel, so it's definitely I'm very happy to be here on a stream with you. And yeah, everybody should check out her new video on like the sort of blurry lines of like Homo habilis with Australopithecus. It was like super fascinating, and it like completely built off of one of my favorite like human evolution papers that I cite all the time in my arguments with creationists. That Kimball paper from 2016 about like
Kimball and Bowler? Kimball and Bowler.
The transition that wasn't, which is like a super provocative title, but like I cite that paper all the time. So like I was just like super interested in watching your new video on like basically that topic of like where do you draw the line, or how Homo blends with Australopithecus, and how there's not this stark transition. It's like a very gradual thing, and it's like that is gotta be keeping creationists up at night sweating.
Well, they never talk about habilis, and they never talk about Ruelfensis, ever. The best you'll hear is in Contested Bones, where they say it's a mix of human and ape bones, because that's what they always do when they don't know what to do with it. Except, it's a skull! It's a cranium! This isn't a mix of bones, it's a single piece! Like, and there are aspects of the cranium in particular that are mosaic. The teeth are mosaics in and of themselves, right? Like the frontal bone is a mosaic. The bones it's a mosaic made up of mosaics. It's so frustrating. But yeah, no, this is a blast. This is also my first stream. That's why I probably was like biochemist. Why did I think you were like specializing in genetics or something? I think it's because we have so many genetics friends. Yeah. And like pop gen friends that it's like Grayson and I are in a science group together. But no, this was an absolute blast. And oh my gosh, like you flatter me, but yeah, this has been super fun, and I'm glad you enjoyed the recent video. Go watch it, other people. It's science based, so it's got less debunking, but I thought it was fun. So
highly recommend it.
All right, $5 from Pibblepunk, half dog, half canine. Great to meet you, Grayson. Welcome to the line, and as always, it's a good time when Erika's here to dish out some science knowledge. Well, Grayson did a lot of that today, so you've got to give him at least 50% for that.
Also, nice to meet you, Pibblepunk, and that is an awesome name. I just kind of want to say it to myself over and over. Pibblepunk, Pibblepunk, Pibblepunk.
This is a good one, isn't it? It's like it's not alliterative, but it's like it feels like it should be.
It's just fun.
Like Pibble. Yeah, like, it is fun to say.
I'm gonna be like doing like small tasks around my house and just saying like Pibblepunk. Yeah.
Pibblepunk.
Yeah.
Half dog, half canine. $10 from Donkey Butt. Amazing show. Great host, production, and mods. Y'all have any good book recommendations exploring the origins and presence of human empathy? I want to see myself and other humans in a better light. Ooh, Behave by Robert Sapolsky. That's a good one for altruism.
I was also going to recommend Robert Sapolsky. So yeah, we're on the wavelength with that one.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, he's like the guy for this, right? Like he's like a neurologist and a primatologist. Like he does both of them, and he's just got some really incredible insight. And he does this really incredible thing that you don't see enough with talking about characteristics like empathy or like behaviors, which is he links them to like actual anatomy and physiology in the brain, which is really cool. So Sapolsky.
Also,
from a fluffy.
Oh, yes. I was going to say, Sapolsky, he has, like, Stanford has uploaded his various lectures on YouTube. So you can go and watch Sapolsky's lectures like you're in his class at Stanford for free on YouTube. So like, why aren't you doing that?
I actually didn't know that his entire catalog was online, but I love Sapolsky. He looks like a primatologist. Like you see him and he's like, his hair's all over the place, but he's such like a sweet guy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would expect someone who studies baboons to look like.
100%. 100%. Like, this man has just been like chased off of his perch by a roving group of bachelor males. Like, that's what he's been up to. $5 from a fluffy duck. Just helping pay the bills. Thanks for all y'all do. Thank you very much, a fluffy duck. $5 from Meridian Heights. Loving some of the fresh faces seeing on here. First time seeing Grayson. Erika is one of my favorites, and Magic Skeptic from last week is brilliant. Thank you very much, Meridian Heights. Yeah, I'm hoping Grayson will be back. If he'll come back, we'll have him back. If we can coerce him into coming back.
I'm definitely down. I had a lot of fun with all the callers tonight. Seriously, like, great callers, great questions in chat. I'm pleased as punch with the whole experience. It's been a ton of a ton of fun.
Yeah. Heck yeah. All right. $5 from Skeptics and Scoundrels. God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time moves on. Neil deGrasse Tyson. A classic quote. Thank you very much for your $5. $4.99 from Megan Marie. Enjoying the show tonight, so shut up and take my money. What is your favorite hominin? Homo habilis has become my favorite. I hope that's because of a video that you've seen recently, Megan. If not, you should go watch my video, because it turns out there's actually not that much on Homo habilis, and I'm happy to add to the pile. Mine is Ardipithecus ramidus. Always has been, hopefully always will be. I love its weird feet. I love its weird monomorphic body size and canine tooth shape. I love its funky long arms, and I love that it just kind of threw a giant wrench into our kind of stepwise understanding of bipedalism in hominins. So Ardipithecus, that's my favorite.
I will make a pun, but also one that I completely mean. I love Lucy.
So, I love Lucy. Like, hell yeah.
Yeah. So I really would love to hear your thoughts on this too. It's a little bit off topic, but so I've always wanted to branch out from just debating like Christian creationists. I have literally always wanted to debate a Hindu creationist ever since I saw like a YouTube short video where I'm not kidding, Erika. You're going to think this is the best thing ever, but this Hindu creationist made this video about how Australopithecus specimens are proof of Hanuman's monkey army from the Ramayana. Like, literally, like the monkey army from the Ramayana. And King Hanuman, and they're saying that Australopithecus is the proof of this monkey army actually existing. And I want to meet people so bad.
You're like, oh crap, they got us on the ropes. What do we even say to this one? Is he right? That's hysterical. Wow. I mean, we could talk about the flaws in that logic. But let's let sleeping hominins lie on this one. That's hilarious, though. I would actually love to meet that guy as well. $4.99 from Newbert Newman. Grayson, have you read The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Wengrow? It has a fascinating, robust examination of early state development.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of the best books that I've read in the last 5 years. Like, I'm not saying that I agree with every single part of Graeber's analysis, but just in terms of a book that just like utterly flipped something that I had taken for granted, like the basic like teleological arc of history and how civilizations develop, is like totally just made me question that entire narrative and like question everything that I thought I knew about human history and development. And like, he was bringing up so many examples. Like, I'm a huge fan of history, and he was bringing up parts of history that I like literally had never heard of about. And I'm like, this book is so great. Like, I honestly need to do a reread of that book. I read it in 2021, I think, like a couple months after it came out. And like,
yeah, I think that's when it came out, thereabouts.
Yeah. Like, I need to do a reread already, because like I love that book so much. Thank you for bringing it up. I definitely would encourage everybody to read it. Like, don't take it all as like, some sort of gospel truth, but just in terms of like making me question things I thought I knew about history, like no book has gotten close to that same effect. So also RIP to Graeber, because they had planned that to be the first book in a series. And like, I wish that we could have gotten that series so much. Like, I would just, oh my God, like I just wanted to know where they were going with it. Like, the ideas expressed were so deep and profound and new.
Did they pass away?
Literally that book. Yeah, Graeber passed away like shortly after the book, or maybe even before it came out. Like, it was like really weird medical complications that I don't even know what it was. It was just like this freak thing. Like he was young, and it's like so sad because I wish I could read all the rest of where they were going with that series.
That
It was just so
sucks.
like it was such a good book. I really do encourage like everyone to read it. Like it's literally going to be like required reading for like a lot of history
Yeah.
curriculums from now on. Like it became like an instant classic of a book, like a real game changer in the field.
Yeah. Damn, that sucks. I didn't know Grandpa had passed away.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that sucks. But everybody go read it. So do that, enjoy it. Then you can be sad like us. $4.99 from Donkey Bud. Any good documentaries, recommendations about the science and scientists who discovered the history of our universe? I mean, you can go with like a classic, right? Like Cosmos is always a classic for like universe stuff, and cosmology. There was, I mean, I've been really stuck on like the prehistoric organisms stuff, like Prehistoric Planet and A Life on Our Planet, and then but I'm also biased because I like the critters most, so those tend to be the stuff that I like.
Well, there are like new like I mean I probably watched Walking with Dinosaurs and Walking with Prehistoric Beasts like over 100 times in my childhood. So I'm like a huge sucker for that too. And I didn't
Walking with Cavemen? Everybody ditches that one, and it's so sad because that one's got our Australopiths in it, and I find that tragic. Although,
yeah, I mean,
I don't know that we
shame on me.
Fight with
honestly, I didn't even know of that one's existence. I might go check that out after this, but like, because I honestly, I am a sucker for that kind of stuff, and I do love human evolution too. So I honestly, for shame, I do feel ashamed for not knowing that. But what I was to say was like we're kind of witnessing a renaissance of that kind of material, like in the 2020s. Like Apple TV has their whole dinosaur thing, and then Netflix just did their one that's like narrated by Morgan Freeman. That's pretty awesome. And like, so we're kind of in a resurgence of that kind of stuff. But in terms of like more cosmology, I really don't know of like a really good docuseries other than like maybe some stuff on like the Great Courses Plus or something. There are some like, good YouTube channels. I think there's one like the History of Our Universe or something. Like there are some good YouTube channels that that do like long form content about like the history of our universe on like a cosmological scale. But yeah, I sorry I don't have like an exact recommendation for that, but I love that content as well, so I can sympathize.
I feel like I consume most of my educational content on YouTube from like educational YouTubers these days. And like what little I understand of the cosmology stuff is good.
There's also like a ton of like free lectures on YouTube, like from like the actual scientists, like graduate level courses. Like you can learn so much. Like it's awesome.
Carta is great for the human evolution stuff. They've got a really cool series. $5 from Calasia789. Thank you very much. You guys keep the lights on. Calasia, did you have a question there, or is it just... Okay, sorry. $5 from Paramount X. Erika, has anyone ever told you have an awesome voice for a Cortana-like person, like an AI voice, enhanced robotic intelligence for keeping advancements? No, you know what, though? I take that as a great compliment. I'm used to getting roasted for my voice. It has sounded like this since I was like 8. Normally even like while everybody else in my class was getting those nice like voice drops, even if it was just a little bit, never happened for me. It's always been this high, and I assume will stay that way. So I appreciate, I take every compliment I can get to heart. I print them out and lock them away in a box just for me because I need them on rainy days. $20 from Cake Man. How can I build research skills outside of university? I love having discussions about religion and epistemology, but when most of my friends or when most of my information ultimately comes from YouTube, it becomes a matter of my source versus yours. That's a great question. Honestly, my best recommendation for this from like the perspective, like from my area, from my field, is read straight from the literature and watch like lectures from people who are like discussing their own work. If you can find someone discussing their work, read the paper first, watch their discussion of it, right? Watch them walk through the figures, especially because like when you're reading a paper, the first thing you should do is you read the abstract, I go straight to the figures, right? I want to see what the figures say. I want to make sure I can understand the figures. Then I do the conclusion. Then I go back through and read the whole thing. That's typically like the way that I like to do it. But reading a paper, then watching a lecture, and then making sure like you understood it correctly is a great way to make sure that your literature comprehension skills are up to snuff and improving. So that's, if you're not in a university where you've got someone breathing down your neck and making sure that you actually understand what the paper is saying, that's a great skill to have, and you can hone it on the Great Courses Plus or on YouTube or on Udemy or whatever source you like to use.
Yeah, that's basically exactly what I was going to say with like reading actual like peer-reviewed published literature in science, because like there's a whole methodology section. So if you want to like and especially what can be useful too is reading literature reviews and then going back and seeing like, okay, well, they said that they pulled this fact from this paper, and then seeing like what kind of information they pulled from what kind of source, and going in, looking at the methodology, looking at what results they had, how they presented those results. Just reading the scientific literature is probably the best way to imbibe the general like research skills or approach to science and experiment of like university research or scientists without actually being in that circle yourself. And when you're talking about how this stuff on YouTube becomes like my sources versus yours, not all sources are equal. And so there are better sources than others, and that's important to keep in mind. Like literally just last night, I was in a live stream with one of the most prominent flat earthers who like has this whole air of like pseudo intellectualism and is constantly citing scientific papers and things. This guy Witzit, and he literally brought up this point,
Witzit,
and like he tried to move past it, and I said, wait a minute. What is your source for what you just claimed? And he said, well, my friend Zach has done it at his house. And I'm like, so wait, because I'm like, okay,
oh my
so
God.
your source is that you just trust your friend Zach and what he's done. And then I later on
Grayson, you
in that,
Zach? He's a figurehead
stream,
in his field. You don't trust Zach?
later on in that stream, I brought up a source to debunk what he was saying. And my source was a published paper from CERN, who operates the Large Hadron Collider. And he said, well, I just don't trust that source. He said, I don't trust that source. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, it's not your friend Zach, but CERN is kind of a big deal. So it's like not all sources are equal, and it's important to keep that in mind when you're having these discussions with people on YouTube.
I mean, honestly, though, like for me personally, I always run it by my buddy Zach. It's probably the same Zach, you know, like we all just send our sources to Zach, make sure that he gives them the go ahead, and then we can actually use them. In all seriousness, another great tip, by the way, is to check the dates, right? A lot of times from creationists, and especially people who do the pseudoscience, you know, jive, they're hip to the pseudoscience jive. They've got all these sources. Track them down, right? Find out what people have said since then, because especially with the hominid evolution stuff, like, you know, read through contested bones, or, you know, something that any rando on the internet has decided to publish, right? What you'll find is that the sources are often out of date and misinterpreted. Grayson mentioned the paper earlier, Kimmel and Vilmore's Australopithecus to Homo, the transition that wasn't. I have seen on 3 separate occasions creationists pull the first sentence from the introduction from that paper and then not read the exact second sentence that contradicts the first sentence, because it's like, this has long been a mystery. Here's how we solved it, right? Like that. So always go to the source, always read it, and always see how the field has advanced since then. There's a handy tool on most paper websites where you can see the citations and like the citations of the paper that you're reading. Go see what people are saying about it, right? $5 from Jason Jones. Cop, you a time traveler? No, I'm a wizard. Adjusts hat and points to DeLorean next to the phone booth. I believe him. I think John was he was not of this world. $5 from
my worldview of science does not permit me to believe him.
Yeah, fair enough, right? Like, he's got his DeLorean in the background with the door up, and you're just like, I didn't see it. I did.
Yeah.
Crazy, but that's
I'm in
how it
denial.
goes.
I'm in
Millions of people.
hardcore denial.
Yeah, I did not see the time vortex. It did not like pass my retina, right? Millions of people living as foes. Maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate. Thank you, Pibblepunk. Sage words. $6 from Empress Lizard Superhost team tonight. I haven't heard someone yeet themselves into another dimension before. Hail FSM, this flying spaghetti monster. Whoops, wasn't supposed to say. Yeah, you can't reveal that we are all secretly actually acknowledging this greater deity. You cannot tell everybody.
What are you doing?
Keep that on the down low. You're blowing
the
our
first
cover.
rule of Fight Club.
Yeah, that's the
can't
first
be
rule of the
talking
flying
about
spaghetti monster club. You can't put us on blast like that. $5 from Robin Webster. Hate based theory at Gutsick Gibbon. Heart. Hello, Robin Webster. Heart.
Hey, Robin.
$5 from Jimmy is a cat. How probable is it that a super advanced species of octopus existed, built a society, and was wiped out in the last mass extinction? Do you know? This is like a Silurian hypothesis, right?
Yes.
Or similar to the Silurian hypothesis, but I think it was Kurzgesagt. They did a video of like, okay, how likely is it that if this did happen, that we would actually find the remnants of it? And what was really cool is like if they passed, basic hunter-gatherer levels and moved on to being a pastoralist or agricultural situation, the odds that we would find something from them are pretty decent. If they were terrestrial and on the bright spot of land that wasn't getting ground up by plate tectonics, which wouldn't apply to these guys unless they became terrestrial. But if they weren't, we would probably never know. Like if they were like a basic level civilization that was just minding their business, incredibly intelligent, but doing their hunter-gatherer stuff for 300,000 years, which is the time that humans have been doing it, we just wouldn't know, which I think is crazy, right? Like that's kind of bonkers. Like there were probably oodles of pretty intelligent organisms in the past. I would doubt that they reached the level of human hunter-gatherers, and the reason I say that is because I would suppose that after they reached that threshold, they would continue to advance. Like, what would stop them unless it was like the Permian or the Devonian mass extinction or something like that around when cephalopods were first like getting their start, or Ordovician even maybe. But could be. I don't know. It's cool. It's fun. Do you have a note on the Silurian, Grayson? Did you want to talk about the Silurian?
No, I think you basically hit on every point of my feelings about the Silurian hypothesis exactly. I mean, I think if they developed an advanced civilization, that we probably would have found evidence to support that. So I'm not a big believer in the Silurian hypothesis.
What Grayson and I are saying is that there were untold cephalopod dynasties of hunter-gatherers that lived and died right under our noses, and we'll never know. $5 Canadian, I think, from Yahooligan. Great show, everyone. Grayson, you owe me $5 Canadian for the super chat. Damn, true. That's rough.
All right. Yeah, let me know where I can send that $5 Canadian, and I will send you the money.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. This was an absolute blast. Gosh, what else to say? I hope everybody out there is staying warm and safe. I'm sure you guys can hear my dogs yapping in the background, begging to be let out because they can't go 5 seconds without being coddled. But you guys, thank you again for being here. I hope you had as much fun as Grayson and I did. Grayson, do you want to say anything to plug yourself real quick here? I feel like that was the right way to say that, but plug your channel, plug your stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you did enjoy any of what you saw tonight or whatever, I literally have tons of conversations kind of similar to this with people about topics from Big Bang cosmology to abiogenesis to evolution. We didn't really actually get to touch on evolution tonight all that much. I mean, kind of, but not really. But I have a lot of arguments with creationists about that. I just talked with one of the OG YouTube creationists, Nephilim Free, a couple days ago.
Oh no!
So that was the last debate that I did before this. So I'm still in recovery mode from that one, but it was great. It was still a lot of fun. I just am one of those weirdo people that actually likes arguing, and it's like I don't know what's wrong with me, but I do. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing to grow the channel, and I will find a Hindu creationist one day. I will debate one, and I'm putting it out there.
Talk about Hanuman's army.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I'm like doing flat Earth, climate change denial. It's sort of like a journey of like collecting a bunch of weirdo conversations with people, but also continuing to learn new things. And so, like, the people that are watching the video are also learning those things along with me as I like come across new arguments I haven't found like before, and I like make videos about it. So like, yeah, I mean, if you're into learning like I am, I mean, just consider checking it out, because I've learned a ton over the last year, and I want to continue learning more things about all this super cool science and history stuff that I like can't get enough of. So if you're like that at all, maybe you might find something to appreciate at based theory.
Well, I'm not biased at all, but I think that spending a copious amount of time debunking really weird perspectives is actually the best hobby there is. So personally, I endorse wholeheartedly. So you guys, thank you, my gentle, of course, very modern apes, for being here. Don't forget, if you liked this and you were like, crud, I really wanted to super chat, but I didn't get to super chat, well, you can leave a super thanks, because I know for a fact they're enabled. I think they're enabled. I'm 99% sure. I think I ask this every time, and I always get told yes, and then I forget. It literally flies right out of my brain. So leave a super thanks if you want. And in the meantime, you guys, please do take care of yourselves. And thank you for being here at Skeptalk. Bye-bye. And then we dance. You have to dance till the end. And they rush it. They don't rush too fast. You just have to dance anyway.